Chapter 981, Reciprocal Revenge. As Old Knot hurriedly exited the meeting room to verify information with the goblins, Lucius stood there, a mix of fear and sympathy washing over him. He understood why Old Knot resorted to coercion and bribery rather than more direct actions. The magical world had enjoyed a long period of peace, adhering to established rules for decades, and had not yet returned to the wartime mindset. Yet, as Lucius bent over, he caught a glimpse of the Dark Lord pacing in the spacious room. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Why did the Dark Lord care so much about the goblin's claims that Atticus Blaine had opened an ancient vault? Whose vault had Blaine accessed, and what had he obtained? Lucius wasn't the only one pondering these questions. Voldemort was equally preoccupied. According to Lucius, it was Blaine who had resolved the crisis of the Chamber of Secrets, a crisis Voldemort had orchestrated using his notebook. Blaine must have destroyed the Horcrux within it. A Horcrux, protected by powerful magic, couldn't be destroyed by just anyone, but for someone skilled in fiendfire like Blaine, it was feasible. The loss of a Horcrux was significant, but not catastrophic. The pressing issue was whether Blaine understood the true nature of what he had destroyed. With his back to Lucius, Voldemort gazed out at the eerie garden of Malfoy Manor, concealing his unease. The Horcruxes were his deepest secret, the cornerstone of his immortality, and they had to remain secure. Dumbledore, with his pedantic and hypocritical nature, would likely dismiss such dark magic. However, Blaine, a Slytherin by birth, was ambitious and greedy for power, evidenced by his pursuit of the headmaster position at Hogwarts. If Blaine had accessed the restricted section of Hogwarts's library, he would have undoubtedly encountered advanced dark magic revealed. Suddenly, Voldemort turned, his eyes cold and filled with murderous intent as he looked at Lucius, who was still bent over. This was the fool who had exposed his Horcrux to Atticus Blaine. "I regret to inform you, my friend," Voldemort said, twirling his yew wand as he approached Lucius, his gaze icy. "I was inclined to forgive your folly, Lucius, but now I have reconsidered." With a thud, Malfoy fell to his knees, cold sweat trickling down his temples, his gray eyes filled with despair. Voldemort intended to kill him, and his family would not be spared. Narcissa was in the house. She wouldn't survive. Only Draco might have a chance, but he hadn't yet proven himself to Blaine. Would Blaine protect Draco? "Please, my lord, have mercy," Lucius pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "At least spare Narcissa and Draco." "I am touched, but it is not your decision, Lucius." "My dear friend," Voldemort replied, his smile cold and mocking. Lucius's face turned ashen, as if he had lost everything dear to him. "Don't be discouraged, Lucius. You have served the Dark Lord well," Voldemort continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You can barely claim loyalty, so I won't kill you immediately. Your fate depends on the news Knot brings back." Lucius, his mind reeling, struggled to comprehend the Dark Lord's words. It was clear that his family's lives were in jeopardy, and the esteemed Malfoy lineage might end tonight. A flash of resentment flickered in his despair-filled eyes. At last, Lucius realized that the Dark Lord could not bring glory to the pure-blood families. This was not the path to honor. Atticus Blaine's intentions were clear. He sought to dominate everyone, wielding the power of life and death over them. This was utterly unacceptable. If it had been only Dumbledore standing against him, the Malfoy family might have felt compelled to follow the Dark Lord to the bitter end. However, with Atticus Blaine now in the picture, and their control over Harry Potter, known as the Dark Lord's nemesis, their situation had changed. In the past, they had dismissed Harry Potter, but now they hoped there was something truly special about the boy with the infamous scar. Perhaps, overwhelmed by the Dark Lord's cruelty, Atticus's skills seemed less efficient than those of the nimble old Knot from over a decade ago. Just an hour later, Knot returned to Malfoy Manor, bursting into the room under Lucius's watchful gaze. "I've discovered something, Master. I told him everything the goblin saw. I used the Imperious Curse." Old Knot exclaimed with glee. Before the Dark Lord could inquire further, Knot divulged all the information he had extracted from the goblin's mind. At the start of Knot's account, Voldemort, who had been tense, relaxed slightly. It was a false alarm. Blaine hadn't come from the vault where another Horcrux was hidden, nor had he gleaned any clues from the notebook. But as Knot continued, Voldemort's expression shifted from suspicion to anger. "Are you telling me that Blaine opened the vault of the great Salazar Slytherin? That's impossible. If my esteemed ancestor had left a vault, I would know of it. Are you lying to me, Not?" Voldemort's icy tone was like a dousing of cold water, causing Not, who had thought he had accomplished something significant, to be gripped by fear once more. "I swear to you, my lord, this is what I saw in the goblin's memory." Not stammered, desperate to convey everything he knew before it was too late. After hearing the full account, both Lucius and Voldemort were left bewildered. "Blaine didn't take any treasure from that vault?" Voldemort asked. "In the goblin's memory, it appeared that way," Not replied cautiously. "Blaine used a potion to calm the magma, and then, as I mentioned, emeralds emerged from the solidifying magma, forming a peculiar shape before Atticus. He attempted to destroy it with magic, but failed. Ultimately, the emeralds and the mysterious cloud vanished, leaving Blaine empty-handed. Perhaps Salazar Slytherin did not wish for mudbloods to access his wealth." Voldemort's eyes narrowed to slits. "Anything else, Not?" "Yes, there's more," Not said, straining to recall. "When Blaine and the girl he brought left Gringotts, I was hiding in an alley, eavesdropping. Forgive me, my lord, but there were many people in Diagon Alley, and I dared not get too close. However, I overheard Blaine mention preparing for the Triwizard Tournament upon returning to Hogwarts." The Triwizard Tournament. Voldemort's expression turned icy as he recalled the humiliating scene at his resurrection ceremony. Yet, despite this, a glimmer of pride flickered in his scarlet eyes. "Blaine seeks to use the Triwizard Tournament to bolster his reputation. Let him pursue such trivialities. I will focus on matters of greater importance. Not, I have other tasks for you." Addressing the silent Not, Voldemort continued softly. "Find McNeil and Avery. Tell them they must fulfill my orders before the Triwizard Tournament. In return for the resurrection ceremony, I will also give Blaine and Dumbledore a surprise. And you, Lucius." Malfoy, who was also kneeling, felt the weight of the Dark Lord's words. His heart leaped into his throat. Atticus Blaine wasn't sure if the information Not had brought back would satisfy the Dark Lord. If it didn't, the Malfoy family would be doomed. However, the Dark Lord's next words allowed him to breathe a sigh of relief. "I want you to accompany me to Gringotts. I must see the Malfoy family vault with my own eyes. After that, you will go to Hogwarts." "To Hogwarts?" Malfoy asked cautiously. "I can't have the Death Eaters who remain loyal to me at that school leaving frequently. Dumbledore would become suspicious. You will go, Lucius, and ask him to find out what those emeralds that Atticus Blaine encountered are. Severus has informed me that he has a closer relationship with Blaine than Dumbledore does. I believe he will uncover the truth for the Dark Lord." End of this chapter. Chapter 982, Next Arrangements. A gentle evening rain washed away the lingering anxiety in the air. As night descended, the torches hanging on the walls burned with an unusual intensity, casting a fiery glow in the otherwise quiet physical education classroom. Even the 2 rows of damaged and weary statues along the wall seemed to straighten their chests with renewed vigor. Dozens of young wizards from 4 academies, now considered elite, were in high spirits, eagerly anticipating the opening of the classroom door. When the tightly closed door finally swung open, the classroom erupted with thunderous shouts and enthusiastic applause, shattering the silence like a gust of wind that caused the flames to flicker and dance wildly. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Atticus Blaine greeted as he walked to the center of the room. He carefully observed each of their determined faces before offering a gentle smile. "I am delighted to have the opportunity to continue teaching you physical education. Professor McGonagall informed me today that she had considered removing irresponsible black sheep like me from the teaching team half a month ago to prevent me from corrupting other professors." A wave of cheerful laughter filled the room. Amid the noise, Ernie from the Hufflepuff team raised his hand and shouted, "My father wrote to tell me that the Magical Congress of the United States of America was planning to invite you to be the director of their security department. I told him that this was impossible and that you would not abandon us." "Oh, thank you for your confidence, Mr. Macmillan," Atticus replied with a smile. "The truth is, I couldn't reach an agreement with Samuel Quahog chairman of the Magical Congress of the United States of America, on the issue of salary, so I came back here." Harry grinned, his previously unsettled heart now calmed by Professor Blaine's humorous remark. "My dad told me that you helped Makusa defeat a group of vampires." Cedric's handsome cheeks flushed with excitement. "Can you tell us in detail, Professor? Who is more powerful between them and the werewolves?" "There's really nothing much to say, Mr. Diggory," Atticus said, spreading his hands and shrugging, still smiling. "Maybe I'm just better at dealing with evil forces. Honestly, I don't feel much difference between the two." "He's so cool," Fred exclaimed, blowing a loud whistle and clapping vigorously along with everyone else. Atticus's handsome face, illuminated by the flickering firelight, his deep eyes, and his humble demeanor, despite his remarkable achievements, captivated the young wizards. Many girls gazed at Atticus with stars in their eyes. Harry, catching a glimpse of Hermione, was momentarily stunned. He recognized the eager look in her eyes, reminiscent of when she first met Gilderoy Lockhart, the notorious fraud. "Well, thank you very much for still welcoming me as the professor of this course. So, Miss Granger?" Atticus called out to Hermione. Hermione, who had been listening intently to Professor Blaine's speech, was caught off guard by being addressed. She responded quickly, squeezing past Draco Malfoy, who stood in front of her, to come forward. "I trust that the class has been in reasonably good order in my absence, Miss Granger?" "Well," Hermione nodded, taking a breath before answering swiftly. "Everything is normal, Professor Blaine. No one is absent. Luna is responsible for supervising the daily running exercises to ensure that no one is lazy, and Neville is responsible for maintaining order in physical education classes. I am responsible for answering some questions when we practice spells on armor. But without you, we—" "That's enough, Miss Granger." Atticus Blaine nodded with satisfaction, gesturing for Hermione to rejoin the student group. He then turned his attention to the eager young wizards before him. "Before we begin today's training, I want to share a bit about my plans," Atticus said, pacing thoughtfully in front of the students. "Firstly, as I've mentioned before, physical education will officially conclude by the end of the semester, and there will be an exam before it ends." "What will that entail, Professor Blaine?" Hermione inquired, her interest piqued. She always paid extra attention to exams, especially in physical education, as she felt confident in her abilities compared to other academic subjects. "The specifics of the exam," Atticus replied, casting a meaningful glance at Hermione and smiling, "will be revealed in due time, but not today. What I can tell you is that this exam will be quite thrilling." After allowing the students a moment to murmur among themselves, Atticus continued, "Starting next year, physical education will be offered as an elective for those entering the 3rd grade. At that time, I will assess the new 3rd-year students who wish to participate in physical education training to determine who is capable of mastering this course. Yes, Miss Greengrass?" Atticus paused, acknowledging Astoria, who had raised her hand. "I will be a junior next year, Professor Blaine," Astoria said with a clear voice. "Does this mean I have the opportunity to undergo the training again?" "Indeed, that's correct," Atticus replied gently. "However, I don't recommend re-enrolling in the new class. The courses won't be as rigorous as what you've already experienced. I plan to extend the training over 3 years, allowing new students to adapt gradually. Since you've kept up with the current course, Miss Greengrass, you should continue with your daily training. There's no particular need to start over. Of course, I respect your decision." Many students envied Astoria's opportunity to consolidate her skills, and after a moment of contemplation, she nodded and returned to Draco's side. Continuing with my earlier point, Atticus resumed, "The first official Owls-level physical education exam will commence in 3 years. Senior students won't be able to participate, so if you pass this year's final exam, you'll automatically qualify for the Newt's advanced class I'll offer next semester when you reach the 6th grade. Since the formal course has ended, you now have the option to opt out, and I won't force anyone to join the advanced class. Who would choose to forego the opportunity to join the advanced physical education class?" The young wizards looked at Professor Blaine with determination in their eyes. Sensing their enthusiasm, Atticus smiled, feeling reassured. Magic isn't solely about confrontation, In today's wizarding world, it primarily enhances the lives of wizards. However, Atticus firmly believed that elite armed forces were essential for maintaining peace and stability in the wizarding world and should never be neglected. The first proper physical education class in 2 months concluded with the students expressing their reluctance to leave. Atticus waved his wand, neatly stacking the desks against the wall, and offered a gentle smile to the students waiting for him. Finally, his gaze settled on Draco. "Draco, come with me." The existence of physical education classes and the improvements the experience seemed to have a transformative effect on the young master from a prominent family, making him less lazy and less confused by his abundance of privileges. Some admirable qualities in his character began to emerge. Despite his curiosity, Draco refrained from asking questions as he followed Professor Blaine. "Go in," Atticus Blaine instructed as they reached the student security office on the 3rd floor. He raised his chin and smiled at the bewildered Draco. "Professor Snape is inside, and your father is waiting for you as well." End of this chapter. Chapter 983, Loyal Lucius. As Atticus Blaine's office door closed with a soft click behind him, Draco felt a wave of surprise. Atticus himself hadn't entered, and the sight of his father's stern face made Draco uneasy. He realized that his father likely preferred to have this conversation without Atticus overhearing. The fireplace in the office was unlit, but a simple candelabra on Atticus's desk cast a warm glow. Before addressing his father, Draco took a moment to survey the office, which he hadn't visited in some time. The room maintained its simple elegance, though a new addition, a tall old storage cabinet, stood beside the sofa. Draco had heard about this cabinet. Since Hermione Granger's curse attack, the school had begun daily inspections of incoming and outgoing mail. All items related to dark magic, potentially harmful to students, were confiscated, whether they belonged to students or faculty. Atticus was responsible for these confiscated items, and he also stored a few personal belongings in the cabinet. "Father," Draco began, dismissing the absurd notion of retrieving contraband from Atticus. He collected his thoughts and approached his father and Professor Snape, who were examining something in front of the cabinet. "Why are you here so suddenly?" "Oh, this is it!" Draco hurried over, intending to ask his father why he had come to the school unannounced. His gaze fell on the display space above the cabinet, and his light gray eyes widened in shock. He forgot his question, his attention riveted on an object behind the glass. "This belongs to the Dark Witch. But isn't this thing in the hands of the Ministry of Magic?" he murmured in disbelief. "Vetia Cleona's wand. The one in the Ministry's hands is a fake," Snape replied lazily, his casual tone startling Draco. "Perhaps it should be called a staff. Atticus placed it here as a trophy, but I think this might not be a wise decision." "Considering past events, Severus, your student has a penchant for seeking attention, so his behavior is understandable," Lucius Malfoy remarked, his voice laced with disdain for Atticus Blaine. He shifted his gaze from the staff to his son. Draco lowered his head under his father's sharp scrutiny. Lucius's gray eyes briefly softened with guilt and sadness, but he quickly masked his emotions. Pointing to a package on the coffee table, Lucius spoke in a cold tone. "Your mother and I visited Dijon recently. She bought some special cakes and candies and asked me to bring them to you." Draco blinked, puzzled. "Just some candy? You delivered it yourself?" "That's not the question you should be asking, Draco," Lucius replied sternly. "Take it back to the dormitory. Remember to focus more on your studies. Severus tells me that only in physical education do you match Granger. I hope you understand the humiliation I felt hearing that the heir of the noble Malfoy family is overshadowed by a Muggle-born." The term Muggle-born no longer sounded as pleasant to Draco's ears. He shrugged and glanced guiltily at the office door. "Go ahead," Lucius said, suppressing his emotions. "Don't forget to write to your mother and tell her how much you enjoyed the treats she carefully selected for you." "Understood, Father," Draco muttered quietly, lifting the snacks from the coffee table. They were so heavy he had to cradle them in his arms. Atticus was standing in a corridor, admiring the moonlight. When he saw Draco approaching, with a bundle of snacks in his arms, Atticus Blaine smiled warmly and said, "Your father and mother love you very much, Draco. That's something to be envied." Draco hesitated for a moment before nodding. He wasn't accustomed to such direct expressions of affection. Professor Blaine didn't say much more. He simply smiled, patted Draco on the shoulder, and walked toward the open office door. "Professor Blaine?" Draco called out suddenly, his voice tinged with nervousness. Atticus turned back, his eyes questioning. Draco's gaze flickered uncertainly. "Well, nothing happened, right?" Atticus raised an eyebrow in surprise, but then smiled reassuringly. "Of course not." With that, he entered his office. The room was dim, the light from the candlesticks subdued, casting shadows that made the office appear darker than before. Atticus strode to the sofa, sat down, and interlaced his fingers on his knees, his gaze steady on Lucius Malfoy, who seemed less composed. "Sit down," Atticus said simply, a command that brought Lucius a measure of relief. His loyalty was evidently valued. At least, Atticus hadn't offered him a seat during his last visit to the office. Severus Snape, choosing not to partake in the conversation, gave Atticus a meaningful look before lighting the fireplace with his wand and departing through the school's flu network. "You mentioned that Voldemort learned from Nott that I had entered Salazar Slytherin's vault?" Atticus's mention of the name made Lucius shudder. He took a few deep breaths and lowered his head. "That's correct, Mr. Blaine. Before Nott delivered this precise information, the Dark Lord was anxious about the news of you opening an ancient family vault. Strangely, after learning about it, he seemed more at ease. Yet, he couldn't believe it. He thought that if there was a Slytherin vault in Gringotts, he should have known. He was very curious about what you obtained, so I was sent here to ask Severus. He instructed me to use the opportunity of visiting the Malfoy vault to create a chance for him to access Gringotts' basement." Atticus closed his eyes, deep in thought. The flickering light and shadows cast a regal aura on his youthful face, instilling fear in Lucius. "Did you follow him deep underground?" "No," Lucius replied, shaking his head. "After opening the Malfoy family vault, he cast the Imperious Curse on the goblins and left. I don't know where he went, but when he returned, he instructed me to find Severus immediately to sort this out." "I will provide Severus with a reasonable explanation," Atticus said calmly, looking at Lucius. "Is there anything else I should know?" Lucius hesitated. His latest mission was to go to Dijon and recruit the giant for the Dark Lord's cause. However, he didn't need to elaborate, as Atticus was likely aware that they had encountered the giant Hagrid in the mountains of Dijon. "One thing," Lucius hesitated before continuing. "The Dark Lord seems to be planning something for the day of the third Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts. When he learned you were preparing for the tournament, he instructed Old Nott to inform McNeil and Avery to expedite their task." "McNeil, the executive officer of the Dangerous Animals Committee," Atticus murmured. "What mission?" "I have no idea," Lucius admitted nervously. "The Dark Lord keeps the tasks assigned to each team confidential. We are not allowed to communicate with each other. Only he knows everything." "Oh, so he's not entirely foolish," Atticus remarked with a smile. "What do you think McNeil and Avery are up to?" "It must be related to the Ministry of Magic," Lucius speculated softly, pursing his thin lips. "Otherwise, the Dark Lord wouldn't have chosen 2 Death Eaters working there for the mission. Based on his recent actions, it's clear he's eager to expand his influence. Power. So, I guess he might be planning to attack Azkaban." End of this chapter. Chapter 984, Targeting Yourself. After making his deduction, Lucius scrutinized Atticus Blaine's expression. Anyone with a modicum of intelligence could discern why the Dark Lord targeted Azkaban. His most loyal and elite Death Eaters were imprisoned there. If the Dark Lord managed to find a way into Azkaban and free these malevolent followers, the consequences would be profound. The Ministry of Magic would suffer a severe blow to its reputation, and the British wizarding world would be plunged into chaos. It would essentially be the Dark Lord's declaration of his return, a rallying cry for his forces. Based on previous assumptions, Atticus Blaine was expected to react with anger, or at least concern upon hearing the news. While he might not care about the Ministry's authority being undermined, he certainly wouldn't want the wizarding world to descend into disorder. However, reality defied expectations. Atticus showed no signs of anxiety. He simply reclined on the sofa, rhythmically twirling his thumbs. "A reasonable guess," Atticus acknowledged with a slight nod, affirming Lucius's statement. "You're not going to stop it?" Lucius asked, taken aback by Atticus's reaction. The depth of Atticus's gaze made Lucius's heart tremble, prompting him to lower his head instinctively. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blaine. I shouldn't have overstepped my bounds." "It's all right, Lucius. I'm not the Dark Lord, eager to take lives at whim," Atticus replied in a calm, serene tone. "But you must understand that knowing too much can be detrimental to your current position." Lucius nodded, his expression dejected. Just 3 months ago, he was the head of the illustrious Malfoy family and a renowned business magnate in the British and European wizarding communities. But since the Dark Lord's resurrection, he had been reduced to working as a spy to survive. The Dark Lord was never known for his generosity, and Lucius was not naive enough to believe he could escape unscathed after destroying the Dark Lord's treasure. His life was spared only because he still had utility, especially since the Dark Lord had yet to reassemble his forces. If the Death Eaters in Azkaban were freed, the Dark Lord would have more options, and it was uncertain whether he would spare Lucius's family or torment them for his amusement before ultimately destroying the Malfoy lineage. Having relayed the essential information, Lucius anxiously awaited Atticus's response, uncertain if he had provided satisfactory intelligence. He also anticipated further assignments from Atticus, hoping they wouldn't lead to his demise. As Atticus processed the information Lucius had brought, the most significant revelation was Voldemort's attitude towards his incursion into Salazar Slytherin's vault. Voldemort's evident concern, coupled with his nervousness, further validated the suspicions held by Atticus and Dumbledore. "Voldemort in Gringotts," Atticus began, pausing mid-sentence to ponder before continuing. "Back then, when Voldemort was last active, who were his most trusted Death Eaters besides you, Lucius?" Most trusted Death Eater? A decade ago, Lucius would have proudly claimed to be the Dark Lord's most trusted confidant. He would have reluctantly acknowledged a few colleagues who shared similar favor. But now, all he could muster was a bitter smile. "From what I've observed, Mr. Blaine, the Dark Lord trusts no one," Lucius replied, his voice tinged with bitterness and hoarseness. "He only trusts himself, of course." "If you insist on an answer, then I think—" Lucius took a deep breath before continuing. "He trusted Severus, the Lestranges, the Carrows, Evan Rosier. In short, probably all those imprisoned in Azkaban." Atticus Blaine nodded thoughtfully and fell silent once more. If Voldemort had indeed entrusted another Death Eater, besides Lucius, with a Horcrux, and that Death Eater had hidden it in a Gringotts vault, then without the correct information, each vault would need to be checked individually. Such an endeavor would not only cause significant trouble for Old Bana, but LD also suggests that Voldemort anticipated both him and Dumbledore discovering his Horcruxes, complicating the search for the remaining ones. This task required a plausible excuse, so even if Voldemort discovered the vault breach, he wouldn't suspect it was aimed at his Horcruxes. "There is something I need your assistance with, Lucius." Atticus finally spoke, breaking the long silence that had left Lucius uneasy. Hearing this, Lucius felt a chill, but also a sense of relief. Atticus's request indicated two things. First, that Lucius held value in Atticus's eyes, and second, that there was a degree of trust between them. It was somewhat disheartening that the head of the Malfoy family found solace in being useful, but the wizarding world was harsh. With the Dark Lord's return and the looming war, countless wizards would become casualties, while only a select few would be the strategists. Despite Atticus's less-than-cordial demeanor, Lucius sensed he wasn't being treated as a mere pawn. "It is my pleasure to be of service to you, Mr. Blaine." Lucius began to rise, but Atticus raised a hand, exerting a force that pressed Lucius back onto the sofa. "There is one thing." Atticus lowered his hand and spoke calmly. "The position of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts has been vacant for several months. Fudge has recommended his right-hand woman, Dolores Umbridge, to Headmaster Dumbledore for the role." Fudge's suggestion of Umbridge as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor left Lucius momentarily stunned. His eyes twitched as he blurted out, "You mean to say that the Ministry of Magic is trying to interfere with Hogwarts?" "It's obvious, isn't it?" Atticus replied with a smile. "What do you want me to do?" Lucius asked cautiously, scrutinizing Atticus. If you want me to use the Malfoy family's influence to counter Fudge's decision, it won't be easy. Moreover, if the Dark Lord learns of this, he might relish the conflict between the Ministry and you. Yes, Voldemort would certainly be pleased to see this happen. So, Atticus smiled meaningfully. I want you to report this matter to Voldemort and persuade him to let you assist Cornelius Fudge, thereby escalating the situation. He will undoubtedly agree. As Atticus elaborated, Lucius's confusion morphed into surprise and doubt. Was Atticus mad? Was he leading him to ruin? Why would you ask me to do this, Mr. Blaine? Lucius finally questioned, unable to contain himself. You know that if I do this and cooperate with the Ministry to pressure Hogwarts, it could spell disaster for Hogwarts, and you might not withstand it. End of this chapter. Chapter 985. Fame. Perhaps it was Atticus Blaine's return that had a deterrent effect on the young wizards who enjoyed wandering the castle at night. After bidding farewell to Lucius Malfoy, Atticus made his way to Dumbledore's office. The corridors were devoid of any mischievous students, with only Peeves' manic laughter and Filch's frustrated mutterings echoing through the empty halls. Upon entering the headmaster's office, Atticus found Dumbledore seated in his chair, gazing thoughtfully at the domed ceiling. The pensieve on his desk emitted a soft, star-like glow. As Atticus passed the hearth where Fawkes the Phoenix rested, he paused to observe the creature. Fawkes, having recently been reborn, was still regaining his strength. A few vibrant feathers had already sprouted from his young body as he nestled in the warm ashes. Is there a possibility, Headmaster Dumbledore? Atticus began with a smile, gently stroking the soft feathers on Fawkes's head. Suppose, just suppose one day. That's not for me to decide, Atticus, Dumbledore replied with a serene smile. You'll need Fawkes' consent for that. Atticus shrugged and moved away from the hearth, approaching the slender-legged desk with his gaze fixed on the pensieve. Before he could inquire, Dumbledore offered an explanation. I'm revisiting some memories, Dumbledore said, specifically those of the trials of Tom's Death Eaters after he last lost his powers. Atticus nodded, understanding the reason behind Dumbledore's reflection. I spoke with Lucius Malfoy, and from what he shared, our previous suspicions seem plausible. Besides Horcruxes, what else could make Tom anxious now? He's no longer the orphanage boy. Wealth isn't his aim, only immortality is. I asked Lucius for his thoughts. Apart from him, who are Voldemort's most trusted Death Eaters, he provided some names, Atticus recounted, listing the Death Eaters Lucius had mentioned. We can't pinpoint the exact answer, Headmaster Dumbledore. If we want to locate the Horcrux possibly hidden in a Gringotts vault, we must access the vaults of Voldemort's loyal followers. But you know that's impossible, Atticus, Dumbledore cautioned, his gaze carrying a warning. It's inappropriate at this moment, Atticus acknowledged calmly. But as the situation deteriorates and the wizarding world edges towards open conflict, some plans that are usually unacceptable might gain understanding. Dumbledore remained silent, rubbing his temples warily. Certain actions were absolute taboos for him, yet he couldn't restrain Atticus's methods. While wary of disrupting order, Dumbledore had to admit that some unorthodox measures could indeed expedite solutions. In dealing with Voldemort, Dumbledore and Atticus had differing approaches. The Order of the Phoenix's actions were more targeted, countering Voldemort's attempts to expand his power. Meanwhile, some of Atticus's strategies, though seemingly unrelated in the short term, directly addressed the core issues. Even though Dumbledore understood Atticus's motives for pushing Hogwarts towards greater independence, he did not intervene. After hearing what Atticus had instructed Lucius to do, Dumbledore sighed. I have no doubt you'll achieve your goal, Atticus, but be prepared. Once Fudge realizes Hogwarts is slipping further from his control, he may react unpredictably. Atticus rummaged through his robes and produced a letter, placing it before Dumbledore. There's something you might already be aware of, Headmaster. Atticus began, looking intently at Dumbledore, the habit of sleeping, and Lucius knew he would find him in the dimly lit room at the top of the manor. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was only broken by the soft rustle of Lucius's robes as he ascended the stairs. Upon reaching the top floor, Lucius paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts before entering the room. The door creaked open, revealing a space shrouded in shadows, with only a few candles flickering on the mantelpiece. The Dark Lord stood by the window, his silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. "Lucius," Voldemort's voice was a whisper, yet it carried the weight of command. "What news do you bring?" Lucius bowed slightly, his voice steady despite the anxiety that gnawed at him. "My lord, the situation at Hogwarts remains unchanged. Dumbledore is as vigilant as ever, and his allies are growing restless under the Ministry's pressure." Voldemort turned, his eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating light. "And what of the British Ministry's machinations? Are they still intent on undermining the Confederation?" "Yes, my lord," Lucius replied, his tone respectful. "Fudge is desperate to maintain control, and his actions grow more reckless by the day. However, there are those within the Ministry who question his judgment." A thin smile curled on Voldemort's lips. "Good. Let them question. Doubt is a powerful ally." Lucius nodded, understanding the unspoken command. "I will continue to monitor the situation, my lord, and ensure that our interests are protected." "See that you do," Voldemort said, turning back to the window. "And remember, Lucius, failure is not an option." With a final bow, Lucius retreated from the room, the weight of his responsibilities pressing heavily upon him. As he descended the stairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that the delicate balance of power was teetering on the edge of chaos. Back in the study, Lucius allowed himself a moment of reflection. The path he had chosen was fraught with danger, but he was determined to see it through. For the sake of his family and the future of the wizarding world, he would play his part in the unfolding drama, no matter the cost. In the study and living room specially prepared for him, Atticus Blaine could faintly hear the Dark Lord's voice coming from the terrace on the other side. "I thought you had retired for the night, my dear master," Lucius said, hesitating at the door leading to the terrace. He tugged at his collar, a gesture of guilt and apprehension. "Ah, you have returned, my dear Lucius," Voldemort replied, lounging in a comfortable recliner, draped in a loose black robe. With a graceful movement of his slender fingers, the recliner slowly rotated, bringing Voldemort face to face with Lucius. Lucius cast a quick glance at Voldemort's pale wife, who was holding a tea tray. His lips parted as if to speak, but the sight of the Dark Lord's scarlet, snake-like eyes, which held a cold smile, silenced him. Lucius held his breath, feeling the weight of the moment. In the next instant, he slowly knelt down, reverently lifting the hem of the Dark Lord's robe to his lips and kissing it. "I have completed the task you assigned to me, my esteemed master." End of this chapter. Chapter 986. Accompanying the king is like accompanying a tiger. The bright moon in the night sky rose above the heads of the three figures on the terrace. Yet, under its glow, Malfoy Manor lacked its usual elegance, appearing instead as somber as a vast cemetery. Even the gentle breeze that swept by carried a chilling edge. "Ah, the mission. Of course, I trust you can complete it. After all, it's merely a message delivery, isn't it?" "Lucius, if you manage to bungle even this, I would be truly astonished," the Dark Lord quipped. Lucius and Narcissa forced smiles in response, though their expressions were more akin to grimaces. "The issue is..." Voldemort's smile turned icy. "Dumbledore. Oh, and Blaine, they didn't question your sudden visit to Hogwarts, did they?" "No, my lord," Lucius replied, still kneeling. "I didn't encounter Dumbledore. It was Atticus Blaine who escorted me to Hogwarts. I told him I was heading to Hogsmeade for business, and that I came to Hogwarts to deliver snacks Narcissa prepared for Draco. Then, I requested to see Severus under the guise of inquiring about Draco's school performance. Blaine allowed Severus to meet me before he went to class, giving me the chance to relay your orders to Severus." The Dark Lord listened intently, his narrow nostrils flaring slightly as he sniffed the air, which carried a faintly metallic scent. "Very good, Lucius. While your intellect may not rival that of the Dark Lord, your cleverness proves useful from time to time," Voldemort chuckled. "Rise, Lucius, we can converse. Truth be told, I don't feel sleepy. It's not due to worry, you see. Many years ago, when my magical powers deepened, I found I needed little sleep." Narcissa, observing her husband's weary demeanor, felt a pang of concern. But as she collected herself, she noticed the Dark Lord's gaze fixed on her with interest. She quickly composed herself and bowed slightly. "Would you like me to prepare some refreshments, master?" "Oh no, Narcissa. My stomach is quite satisfied with the snacks you prepared. Let's all chat. You might find it enlightening to hear what our dear Lucius has been concealing." In the stillness of the night, the atmosphere suddenly shifted, as if a bolt of lightning had struck. Narcissa's face turned pale, and Lucius, who had just risen, felt his legs weaken. Yet this time, he did not kneel. Facing Voldemort's stern expression, his own pale face betrayed a mix of confusion, innocence, and urgency. "I have hidden nothing from you, Master. There are simply matters I haven't yet had the chance to report." "And what might those be?" Voldemort inquired, his voice a soft hiss. At that moment, Nagini slithered from the shadows, resting its head on Voldemort's lap, allowing him to stroke its fearsome head as it flicked its dark red tongue. "I received some news. Actually, Severus volunteered it," Lucius continued, a bead of cold sweat trickling from his forehead, stinging his eyes, yet he dared not wipe it away. "Severus mentioned that the Minister of Magic plans to appoint Dolores Umbridge as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts." Umbridge as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor? So, our esteemed Minister of Magic is finally taking a stand against Blaine and Dumbledore? Voldemort mused with interest. A professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. Not the wisest choice. You know, there's a rumor I cursed that position. A powerful curse indeed, one that has claimed many lives. Even I can't remove my own. Voldemort continued to stroke Nagini's head slowly. Dumbledore agreed? Oh, I'm afraid he wouldn't refuse. He is such a pathetic, hypocritical, and cowardly old man. He knew that Cornelius Fudge sent people into Hogwarts to keep an eye on him, yet he wouldn't refuse. Your wisdom is admirable, my lord, Lucius said, trembling. Severus told me that Dumbledore was indeed in a dilemma, but he did not intend to refuse. However, Atticus Blaine returned from New York. It is said that he urged Dumbledore to reject the Ministry of Magic's arrangement and not allow Dolores Umbridge to enter Hogwarts. Blaine was firm in his stance, and I fear Fudge may not realize his intentions. So? Voldemort prompted. I was wondering if we need to lend a hand to Cornelius Fudge, Master, Lucius said, mustering his courage. Voldemort narrowed his eyes, remaining silent, as if waiting for further explanation. Seeing this, Lucius brushed a strand of sweaty blonde hair from his eyes, his tone tinged with excitement. It's beneficial for us, Master. As you mentioned, Cornelius Fudge didn't send Dolores Umbridge to Hogwarts to teach Defense Against the Dark Arts. She was there to monitor and investigate Dumbledore and Blaine. Over the years, Fudge has been anxious about his position, fearing Dumbledore might suddenly decide to become Minister of Magic. He believes Dumbledore's claims of your return are meant to incite panic and oust him from office. Sending Umbridge to Hogwarts is Fudge's preventive measure. Umbridge is loyal to Fudge, and once she enters Hogwarts, she will undoubtedly cause trouble for Dumbledore and Blaine. Noticing that the Dark Lord showed no signs of anger, Lucius ignored the peculiar look in Narcissa's eyes and continued excitedly. Dumbledore tried to use the Order of the Phoenix to interfere with your plans. He asked Hagrid to stop us from recruiting giants and sent Moody to take the Longbottoms to Northern Europe to thwart our recruitment of wizards there. Of course, Dumbledore couldn't stop you, and all his efforts failed. But Lucius took a deep breath. If Umbridge continues to cause trouble for Dumbledore and Blaine, it will undoubtedly drain their energy. Even Atticus Blaine does not have the audacity to kill the senior undersecretary of the Ministry of Magic. A sudden gust of wind rustled Voldemort's robes. A faint light flickered in his narrowed scarlet eyes as he pondered. But how do you intend to assist the Minister of Magic in achieving his ridiculous little ambition, my dear friend? After a moment, Voldemort turned his gaze to Lucius, who looked expectant. If Blaine insists on not letting Umbridge enter Hogwarts, our foolish Minister of Magic may be helpless. Or do you plan to use gold to make Blaine compromise? Unless the Ministry of Magic passes legislation on this matter and establishes the right to interfere with Hogwarts teaching activities, Fudge is doomed to fail. But there is another way. Lucius's expression showed a hint of caution. The school board has the power to decide on Hogwarts teaching activities and personnel arrangements. If you agree, you could give the order. You know, some of the directors of the school board are your Death Eaters. If you let them assist in this matter, I believe the Malfoy family can return to the school board. Oh, ho ho, Voldemort placed Nagini on the ground, rose from the recliner, and approached Lucius, his downcast eyes exuding a heavy pressure. "Cunning Malfoy, is this your plan? To let the Malfoy family regain power?" Lucius bent down in fear. "My lord, the Malfoy family only wishes to serve you better." "Dig out your bones," Voldemort commanded, his voice cold and menacing. He turned sharply, his eyes filled with malice, and brought his wand down with the force of a whip. The air cracked with the sound of magic, followed by agonized screams that reverberated through the halls of Malfoy Manor. Narcissa's desperate cries and pleas filled the room as she clung to her husband, trying to shield him from the Dark Lord's wrath. Only when Lucius Malfoy lay on the brink of death did Voldemort finally lower his wand. "This is your punishment, Lucius," he drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. "Punishment for daring to deceive me. You sought power for the Malfoy family under the pretense of loyalty to me. It is sheer folly to lie to the Dark Lord, my friend. I trust you will remember this lesson well. Your plan, however, is sound. Proceed with it, Lucius." End of this chapter. Chapter 987, Chance Encounter. Dragon's blood is going up in price. Flu powder is going up in price. Potion ingredients are going up in price. Everything related to magic is becoming more expensive. It feels like galleons are depreciating, but the salaries at the ministry aren't changing. A middle-aged witch with silver-gray hair passed by Atticus Blaine, complaining angrily to her companions. "I really hope our beloved minister can do something to improve the situation." "You're dreaming, Lisa," her companion replied with a lazy yawn. The two of them moved away from the fireplace, disappearing into the bustling reception hall. Similar complaints echoed around, but Atticus remained expressionless as he navigated through the crowded hall. The current business environment in the European wizarding community was bleak, and Atticus Blaine knew precisely why. Ordinary witches and wizards struggled with the rising cost of daily necessities. Most departments of the Ministry of Magic were preoccupied with the increasingly severe security situation, while the top leaders were embroiled in conflicts with Hogwarts. Families like the Blaines, who controlled the lifelines of the wizarding world and ran industries crucial to the daily lives of wizards, were busy expanding territories for the Dark Lord. Before the Dark Lord's return, Atticus and his wife, Narcissa, spent most of the year traveling across Europe, visiting companies and workshops owned by the Blaine family. They were occupied with setting development goals, seeking ways to expand production capacity, suppress costs, and find more reliable suppliers of raw materials. Building strong relationships with politicians from various countries was also a priority to open new markets. Although families like the Blaines controlled the wizarding world, they were also its backbone. A long queue formed in front of the elevator. Atticus stared at the floor indicators above the door with his indifferent gray eyes, feeling a sense of depression building within him. Ding! The elevator arrived, and Atticus followed the line, slowly moving forward. When it was his turn, the elevator was nearly full, but he was distracted, attempting to squeeze into the elevator hall. Arthur, noticing Atticus's absent-minded demeanor, looked surprised. After a moment's hesitation, he asked Percy, who was nervously anticipating an upcoming conversation, to make room for Atticus in the elevator. As the elevator ascended floor by floor, Atticus's mood continued to sink. For a businessman of his stature, staying attuned to the political climate was essential. Although the Ministry of Magic promoted the idea that the British wizarding world remained prosperous and peaceful, businessmen with social standing in other countries sensed something amiss. The market had lost confidence in the British wizarding world. Merchants from abroad were more cautious in their dealings with British families, paying closer attention to cash flow. Industries under the Blaine family name were reducing production, contributing to the current situation, reminiscent of the last civil war in the British wizarding world. Back then, Atticus had been swept up in the Dark Lord's cruel and brutal dreams. When he finally came to his senses, he realized the Blaine family had suffered heavy losses in the war. The first floor, the minister's office, including the minister's office logistics department, a cold female voice announced, snapping Atticus back to reality. "Of Percy." Arthur reassured his son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We need to address this matter sooner rather than later. The minister's mood might be unpredictable, but we can't let that deter us. Lucius Blaine, standing slightly apart from the Weasleys, observed the father-son interaction with a mix of curiosity and disdain. He couldn't help but wonder what predicament had brought Arthur Weasley to the ministry with such urgency. Yet, he knew better than to pry. Arthur was unlikely to divulge any details to him. As the elevator doors opened with a so-feet chime, the three men stepped inside, the atmosphere tense and silent. The ride down seemed interminable, each floor passing with a slow, deliberate click. Lucius found himself lost in thought, contemplating the strange turn of events that had led him to this moment, standing alongside those he once considered beneath him. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, they exited into the bustling atrium of the ministry. The noise and activity were a stark contrast to the quiet tension of the elevator ride. Arthur turned to Lucius, his expression a mix of determination and unease. "Lucius, I appreciate your patience," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I hope we can resolve our matters with the minister soon." Lucius nodded curtly, his usual arrogance tempered by the unusual situation. "Indeed, Arthur, I trust you'll find the answers you're seeking." With that, the Weasleys and Lucius parted ways, each heading in their respective directions. As Lucius walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning of a series of unexpected events. The ministry, with its labyrinthine corridors and hidden agendas, held secrets that even he, with all his influence, could not fully grasp. For Arthur and Percy, the day was far from over. They had a mission to complete, and despite the obstacles, they were determined to see it through. As they navigated the crowded atrium, Arthur's resolve only strengthened. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, as a family. "Percy, I've already told you, it's not your fault at all. The ministry's decision was wrong," Arthur said gently, yet firmly. The three of them took the elevator down one floor, navigating through the tense and bustling office lobby until they reached the door of Dolores Umbridge's office. "Since Dumbledore has clearly refused, let's move forward with legislation, Cornelius," came a voice from inside the office, barely able to contain its excitement. "I'll speak with Pierce as soon as possible. He will support your decision, but you need to meet with the Wizards of the Wizengamot in person, Minister. We must act swiftly, because once we begin, someone is bound to inform Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine." End of this chapter. Chapter 988, Follow the Guidance. Dumbledore had firmly refused to legislate for tip-offs. Upon hearing these sensitive words, the three individuals standing outside Umbridge's office were taken aback. However, Atticus Blaine quickly regained his composure. He eyed Lucius warily and cleared his throat with determination. "Minister, are you in there? I heard from Isaac that you were here," Atticus called out loudly. The heated discussion within the office abruptly ceased, and Fudge's cautious voice responded, "Who is it?" "Arthur Weasley," Atticus announced, raising his voice. "I have something I wish to discuss with you, Minister. Oh, and Lucius Malfoy is here to see you as well." A brief silence followed, broken only by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. The door swung open to reveal Umbridge's toad-like swollen face. She lifted her chin, casting a cold glance at Atticus and the timid boy beside him. However, her demeanor softened considerably when her gaze fell upon Lucius Malfoy. "You go first, Lucius," Umbridge said in a sharp yet accommodating tone. Atticus's expression darkened, but he had no choice but to step aside with Percy and wait. It was evident that Lucius was no stranger to Umbridge's office, as he paid no mind to its poor decor. Inside, Cornelius Fudge stood by Umbridge's desk, clutching a piece of parchment tightly. Upon noticing Lucius's gaze on the parchment, Fudge gasped, crumpled the letter into a ball, and hastily shoved it into his pocket. "What do you want, Malfoy?" Fudge's tone was a stark contrast to the usual friendliness he displayed when accepting sponsorships. He sounded impatient. "The minister and I were discussing an important matter, Lucius," Umbridge interjected with a few chuckles, her tone overly friendly. "So if you have anything important to request from the ministry, you'd better hurry, Lucius." "Oh, thank you very much for taking the time to see me, Minister, Ms. Umbridge," Lucius replied with a polished, grateful smile. "Actually, it's like this. I've noticed some false reports about the current security situation in the wizarding world in the Daily Prophet. Rita Skeeter even claimed that people are losing confidence in the Ministry of Magic. What nonsense! Fudge exclaimed angrily, his face turning a shade of blue. Oh, of course, Minister, Lucius responded with a perfectly timed, flattering smile. These people simply cannot comprehend the challenges of governing a country and ensuring the well-being of its citizens. As for the Malfoy family, with our long-standing history in the British wizarding world, we've witnessed significant improvements in this country. After reading those reports, Narcissa and I decided to support the Ministry of Magic during this critical time. We plan to donate a sum to St. Mungo's to enhance medical care for ordinary residents. Naturally, the ministry should oversee the allocation and use of these funds. Umbridge's face, already adorned with a businesslike smile, brightened further. She didn't forget who should step forward to accept the donation and blinked her eyelashes at Cornelius Fudge. Yes, Cornelius said, his frown easing as he listened to Lucius. He exhaled softly, and though his expression remained strained, he patted Lucius's arm and forced a smile. Thank you, Lucius. You're right. The Ministry of Magic does need more support at this time. He sighed again. If more people were like the Malfoy family, understanding and supportive, the ministry wouldn't be in such a difficult position. Don't worry, Lucius. I've heard some negative things about you, but they're baseless slanders. The Ministry of Magic will not change its view of the Malfoy family because of them. Oh, thank you, Minister, Lucius replied, his voice smooth and reassuring. And Madam Umbridge, Lucius exclaimed with a hint of fear. That's precisely what I was concerned about. As for the donation, Lucius, you and Dolores should coordinate it. I'm afraid I won't have the time to handle it in the near future, Fudge replied. Of course, Miss Yu, Membridge is your right-hand woman, and I have complete confidence in her. Lucius bowed respectfully to Dolores. Is there anything else, Lucius? Fudge asked, his demeanor pleasant. I need to hear what Arthur wants from me. After dealing with him, I must discuss the current issues with Dolores. Oh, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just happened to overhear a word or two, Lucius said cautiously. The trouble you're referring to, legislation, Dumbledore, and Blaine, it's related to Hogwarts, isn't it? Fudge and Umbridge exchanged glances, and Fudge's expression darkened. You know, Dolores said in a simpering voice, recently some individuals at Hogwarts have been spreading absurd and false statements, hoping to disrupt the order the Ministry of Magic has worked hard to maintain. This is absolutely intolerable, so we plan to send personnel to Hogwarts to supervise its daily teaching activities, Lucius interjected quickly. Oh, it said that person is you. Under the surprised and wary gazes of Fudge and Umbridge, Lucius explained, Oh, don't misunderstand, Minister, Miss Umbridge. I'm not prying into the Ministry's top secrets. I just happened to visit Draco at Hogwarts and accidentally heard about this from Severus. That's right, Fudge admitted, his voice softening as he frowned. Umbridge's fake smile vanished, replaced by a gloomy expression. If I'm not mistaken, Lucius continued, observing their reactions. The Ministry of Magic typically has no right or reason to forcibly station personnel at Hogwarts and interfere with its daily teaching, unless a new law is established to ensure the legality of this action. Before Umbridge could respond, Fudge said sullenly, That's exactly what we're planning to do. But this will lead to public scrutiny, Lucius pointed out. People will question the Ministry's motives. Given Dumbledore's previous remarks, they might suspect the Ministry is deliberately suppressing Dumbledore and Hogwarts, potentially damaging its image. Fudge remained silent, his eyes filled with a sinister gleam, clearly having considered Lucius's concerns. But we must proceed, Lucius, Umbridge interjected sharply. We have every reason to believe that Hogwarts has strayed from its educational purpose and is seeking more power. If unchecked, terrible things could happen. Of course, Lucius nodded in agreement. I fully understand your decision. By the way, Minister, Ms. Umbridge, have you discussed this matter with the Hogwarts Board of Directors? School board? Fudge's eyes widened in surprise. Certainly. Lucius, cautious in his approach, was secretly pleased to have steered the conversation to this point, though he feigned surprise. Didn't the Ministry consult the school board? Perhaps you forgot, Minister, that the Malfoy family was once a member of the board. We were blamed for the basilisk incident and removed, but the board of directors has the authority to interfere with Hogwarts teaching activities and personnel appointments. You know, Blaine was the investigator appointed by the board to investigate Slytherin's chamber. Secrets. The board of directors even holds the authority to dismiss the headmaster of Hogwarts. End of this chapter. Chapter 989. The Missing Link. Umbridge's office was enveloped in a tense silence as Fudge and Umbridge exchanged glances. Suddenly, Fudge's eyes lit up with a revelation. "The school board," he exclaimed, his fist pumping the air with excitement as if he had stumbled upon a hidden treasure. "That's it! Atticus Blaine entered Hogwarts through the board of directors. They have the authority to appoint and dismiss the headmaster. How could I have overlooked this?" Umbridge's eyes, swollen and calculating, flickered with contemplation as she weighed the implications of Fudge's discovery. "Lucius!" Fudge exclaimed, rushing forward to grasp Lucius Malfoy's arm, his excitement palpable. "The school board can remove both Dumbledore and Blaine. You support the Ministry of Magic, don't you, my dear Lucius?" "Of course, Minister," Lucius replied smoothly, masking his disdain with a veneer of politeness, though he appeared somewhat uncomfortable. "I am eager to assist the ministry, but as I mentioned earlier, the Malfoy family was blamed for the basilisk incident, and we've been excluded from the school board ever since. It's a disgrace. For centuries, the Malfoys have held a seat on the board, and now that honor has slipped through my fingers." Umbridge narrowed her eyes at Lucius, sensing his ulterior motives. Fudge, recalling the past, felt a twinge of embarrassment. Back then, he had been grateful to Blaine for resolving the Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets issue and for the valuable basilisk. "What would it take to reinstate the Malfoys on the Hogwarts board, Lucius?" Umbridge inquired, her eyes feigning innocence. "To reinstate us would require a 2/3 vote from the directors, Madam Umbridge," Lucius explained with a bow. "There are 11 members, including the Greengrasses, Averys, and Blacks. Unfortunately, not all of them are allies of the Malfoys." Fudge understood the situation, but wasn't angered by Lucius's maneuvering. He considered using the ministry's influence to compel the board to reinstate the Malfoys, as the ministry needed more control over Hogwarts. The idea of using the board to dismiss Dumbledore and Blaine was tempting, but Fudge knew it would provoke fierce resistance from them. He wasn't looking to sever ties with Hogwarts entirely. He needed Dumbledore and Blaine to support the ministry's decisions. Arthur Weasley was taken aback when he saw Fudge, Umbridge, and Lucius Malfoy leaving the office in high spirits, laughing and chatting as if they were old friends. Fudge even had his arm draped affectionately over Lucius's shoulder. "We'll contact those companies immediately, Lucius. Within a week, I promise we can initiate the vote again," Fudge assured him. "Thank you, Minister Fudge." Lucius replied with a smile. "The Malfoy family will ensure the board aligns with the ministry's stance." Arthur was startled by the conversation he overheard. Though he couldn't grasp every detail, it was clear that Fudge and Lucius had reached some sort of agreement. As Fudge was about to embrace Malfoy, Arthur called out, "Minister!" Fudge, momentarily forgetting about Arthur, paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Nevertheless, he stopped and turned to address him. "Please see Lucius out, Dolores," Fudge instructed. "You can also discuss the donation matter." "With great pleasure, Minister," Umbridge replied, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Dolores beamed as she spoke. "Well, come with me, Arthur, and we'll discuss this in my office." Fudge gestured for Arthur to follow and led the way back to the office. "Come on, Percy, let's sort this out," Arthur said, offering Percy an encouraging smile. Percy, visibly nervous with sweat on his forehead, nodded and followed his father into the room. "Who is this, Arthur?" Fudge asked, turning to see a young man who seemed familiar trailing behind Arthur, his brow furrowed in curiosity. The question made Percy blush, and he stood awkwardly, hands clasped, unsure of what to do. Mr. Weasley, however, remained calm and patted Percy on the back. "This is my son, Percy Weasley. Surely, Minister, this isn't the first time you've met him." "Your son?" Fudge replied, eyeing Arthur with suspicion. "Is he also employed by the ministry?" Percy's blush deepened, and he wished fervently for the ground to swallow him whole to escape the embarrassment. Oh, of course, Mr. Weasley said, guiding Percy to the sofa opposite Fudge. Once Percy was seated, Mr. Weasley joined him. He's been with the Ministry for nearly a year, and you might recall that old Barty had an assistant before. Ah, yes, I remember now. Fudge's face lit up with recognition. You were Barty's assistant and helped manage the Department of International Magical Cooperation during his absence. But later, Fudge narrowed his eyes at Percy, who was trying to maintain his composure. He was reprimanded for the incident with old Barty, if I'm not mistaken. You are correct, Minister, Mr. Weasley affirmed seriously. The Ministry held Percy accountable for not realizing Barty Crouch's predicament sooner. He failed to notice that old Barty had been kidnapped. Someone impersonated Crouch through letters, orchestrating the department's tasks. Oh, Fudge said, glancing at the trembling Percy Weasley. He leaned back on the sofa, twirling his thumb indifferently. It's a reasonable punishment, isn't it, Arthur? I'm not singling anyone out, but as Barty's assistant, your son should have recognized that the letters weren't from his boss. It's alarming to think about. If Vitia Cleona had issued dangerous orders this way, and Percy had followed them, the consequences for the wizarding world could have been dire. That's exactly it, Mr. Weasley replied, his cheeks flushing slightly. He wanted to retort with nonsense, but restrained himself, opting for prejudice instead. Strictly speaking, Percy only worked with old Barty for a few months. He didn't have a deep understanding of him. Given this, it's understandable that he didn't realize Barty was in trouble. Punishing only Percy for the Barty incident is objectively unfair, Minister. Fudge squinted, pondering for a moment as he recalled how he had handled the situation. To minimize the fallout, no significant actions were taken at the time, and Barty's assistant, the young man before him, was relegated to the Centaur office of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, a department known for its inactivity, akin to a retirement post. What do you propose we do then, Arthur? Fudge asked, maintaining his indifferent demeanor. Transferring Arthur's son to another department seemed trivial now that the Barty incident had cooled down. Yet, Cornelius was reluctant, primarily due to Arthur's own standing. My thoughts? Mr. Weasley glanced at Percy, his gaze softening. 2. To be honest, Minister, I believe Percy is an exceptional young wizard, Mr. Weasley stated earnestly. This assessment isn't influenced by our father-son relationship. During his time at school, Percy served as a prefect and was the president of the male student union. He achieved 12 newts with outstanding results. Since joining the Ministry of Magic, he has shown immense dedication to his work. While it's true that he lacks experience, isn't that to be expected in someone so young? Yes, Fudge replied, looking at Percy with a hint of surprise. Arthur's son was indeed impressive. However, the Ministry of Magic was filled with the finest Hogwarts graduates, many of whom had been prefects, student union presidents, and had earned numerous newts. But a mistake is a mistake, and it must be addressed, Arthur, Fudge continued. Oh, I suddenly have an idea. End of this chapter. Chapter 990, Vicious. A sudden thought jolted Atticus Blaine upright. He glanced at Arthur Weasley, whose face was etched with seriousness, and a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. If I'm not mistaken about your intention, Arthur, Atticus's tone shifted to one of unexpected warmth. You hope your son can take on a more significant role, correct? The abrupt change in Atticus's demeanor put Mr. Weasley on alert. He furrowed his brow slightly. I'm not seeking power for my son, Minister. It's just that he's not yet 20 years old. He deserves a more challenging position. The Ministry can't let a young man with such potential stagnate in the Centaur office. Indeed, indeed, Atticus nodded earnestly, his gesture igniting a spark of hope in Percy's eyes. Percy's voice quivered with excitement. I'll do anything for the Ministry, Minister, as long as there's something to do. Mr. Weasley shot Percy a cautionary glance, signaling that he would handle the negotiation with the Minister. However, Percy, lost in the prospect of opportunity, missed his father's subtle warning entirely. Oh, that's a very commendable attitude, Percy. Atticus smiled at him with satisfaction. Yes, I believe young people should be given the chance to make mistakes and learn from them. Percy sprang up from the sofa, his posture rigid and his face flushed with anticipation. But Atticus waved him down with a friendly gesture. Yes, I recall now. When Barty was still with the ministry, he mentioned that the assistant assigned to him was very dedicated. It does seem a waste of your talent to keep you in the Centaur office. But you must understand, Percy, you did make a mistake, and the ministry must account for it to the wizarding world. I've already shared my thoughts on the matter of old Barty, Minister, Mr. Weasley interjected cautiously, but Atticus paid him no heed. He focused on Percy, intrigued by the ambition in the young man's eyes. Your placement in the Centaur office was a punishment, Percy. It's time for that to end. However, if you aspire to a more pivotal role, such as my assistant, you'll need to prove yourself, make contributions to the department. Assistant Minister? Percy felt a wave of dizziness, overwhelmed with joy. He hadn't anticipated that the minister would genuinely offer him such a crucial position. What do I need to do, Minister? Percy's voice turned hoarse with emotion. The ministry is indeed facing a challenge that troubles me. Senior Undersecretary Umbridge and I are at a loss. If you can advance this issue, there will be no whispers about my extraordinary promotion of you. With all due respect, Minister, if this is troubling both you and Umbridge, I'm afraid Percy, as I mentioned, lacks the necessary experience. Mr. Weasley expressed his growing unease, politely declining. Yet, Atticus continued to ignore him, his gaze fixed intently on Percy. So, are you willing to try, Percy? I am, Minister, Percy declared, his chest swelling with determination. He didn't even inquire about the issue that had the powerful Minister of Magic and the Deputy Minister so concerned. However, the seasoned Mr. Weasley sensed a conspiracy in Atticus's words and cautiously remarked, Percy is just a young man fresh out of Hogwarts, Minister. I'm afraid he might not be able to tackle the problems that trouble both you and Madame Umbridge. Oh, this has nothing to do with work experience, Atticus assured with a smile. It's not complicated, actually. You just graduated from Hogwarts, Percy. You should know that the Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. In that school, the position is often vacant, and even Dumbledore struggles to find a suitable candidate to fill it. But we can't let this situation persist, can we? Defense against the dark arts is crucial for teaching young wizards how to defend themselves against dangerous dark magic and various perilous creatures. Its importance is undeniable. You wouldn't want Percy to be the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, would you, Minister? Mr. Weasley exclaimed, clicking his tongue in surprise. Oh, the Ministry of Magic does indeed plan to recommend someone for this role at Hogwarts. However, the candidate has already been decided, Arthur. The issue we face now is that Hogwarts harbors some unfortunate prejudices. I mean, Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine are not pleased to see professionals appointed by the Ministry of Magic entering Hogwarts. Fudge opened his mouth and smiled broadly. I suppose Dumbledore and Blaine mistakenly believe that the Ministry of Magic is trying to usurp their authority. So, you want me to speak with Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine to persuade them to accept the ministry-appointed professors for the students? Percy asked, his eyes wide with surprise. This didn't seem like an insurmountable challenge. Both Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine were wizards who were open to communication and willing to consider reasonable suggestions. He felt confident in his ability to tackle this task. Excuse me, Minister. Mr. Weasley stood up, placing his hands on Percy's shoulders, his sparse red hair fluttering slightly. What professional are you referring to? None other than Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary of State for Magic, Fudge replied, his tone tinged with resentment. Dolores is a powerful witch who has battled against evil and is fully qualified for this teaching position, but Dumbledore and Blaine disagree. Mr. Weasley looked skeptical. He quickly realized that Fudge's intention in sending Umbridge to Hogwarts was not out of concern for the lack of a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, but rather to create trouble for Albus and Atticus. No problem, Minister, Percy exclaimed excitedly, as if the position of Assistant Minister was already within his grasp. I can speak with Professor Blaine. He must have some misunderstandings about the ministry. I can convince him to change his mind. Percy, Mr. Weasley said sternly, his expression serious. You simply don't understand. This is not something you can fix. Why, Dad? Percy raised his eyebrows, unconvinced. Because. Mr. Weasley glanced quickly at Fudge, whose sinister eyes made his heart tremble. Taking a deep breath, Mr. Weasley looked at Percy, who was full of resistance, and his mind raced. You've heard from the minister that neither he nor Madame Umbridge could convince Albus and Atticus. Do you want to prove that you're better than the Minister of Magic and the Senior Undersecretary? Percy was speechless. He certainly wouldn't be foolish enough to claim in front of the Minister of Magic that he was superior to the most powerful person in the ministry, but the position of Assistant Minister was tantalizingly close. Don't say that, Arthur. Fudge smiled nonchalantly. As I mentioned, there are some prejudices between Dolores and me and Dumbledore and Blaine, so they can't perceive the Ministry of Magic's intentions correctly. But Percy, he is Blaine and Dumbledore's favorite student, isn't he? I believe he has the potential to change their misguided views. Under the watchful gaze of Mr. Weasley, who looked livid, Fudge's eyes settled on Percy, who was already eager to try. But I must make it clear, Percy, if you can successfully complete this task and convince Dumbledore and Blaine to set aside their prejudices and allow Dolores to teach at Hogwarts, then I will consider you fully capable of being my assistant. But if you... I cannot accomplish this task, Fudge said in a regretful tone. That means you still need to calm down. I'm afraid you'll have to stay in the Centaur office for a while longer. End of this chapter. Chapter 991. Inquire. As May draws to a close, the end of the school year looms near. The anticipation of summer vacation and the final match of the Triwizard Tournament, just over 2 weeks away, has lightened the tension of the impending final exams for the students. Stay focused, Mr. Potter. Professor McGonagall's voice cut through the classroom, refusing to let the young wizards relax. In Transfiguration class, Harry and Ron seized the moment to transform dried cod while whispering about Hagrid's return that night. When they visited him, Hagrid had been tight-lipped about the wound on his face. And Mr. Weasley? Professor McGonagall's stern voice echoed as she strode to the front of the classroom, her lips pursed. She glanced at Seamus's codfish, which was beginning to smoke from his elaborate attempts, and instinctively stepped back, casting a cold glare at Ron, who was snickering. Her eyes landed on the dried cod on Harry and Ron's table. According to the lesson, it should have been transformed into a penholder by now, but their cod was merely curled into a tube, still unmistakably a fish. If you can't successfully turn your cod into a penholder before the end of class, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, then I'm afraid you'll need to write a separate 20-inch long paper on adjusting the intermediate transfiguration spell for cross-species conversion. How? Professor McGonagall declared. Additionally, you'll need to come to my office this weekend to practice until you've mastered this transfiguration spell. Harry and Ron exchanged unhappy glances. This is definitely aimed at you, Harry, Ron muttered. Seamus's cod is worse than ours. At least ours is penholder-shaped. If we can't finish it, we have to write an extra paper. Then, bang! An explosion reverberated through the classroom, and Seamus, his face completely blackened, rolled his eyes and collapsed. Mr. Longbottom, Professor McGonagall sighed deeply, please take Mr. Finnegan to the school hospital. When he wakes up, inform him that he needs to complete the same homework as Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley. At your service, Professor McGonagall, Neville replied with a smile, setting down his perfectly transformed penholder. He effortlessly hoisted Seamus onto his shoulder and left the classroom amidst laughter. Ron was at a loss for words. Help us, Hermione! Harry pleaded anxiously, glancing at Hermione, who was watching them with a knowing look. Humph, Hermione huffed with a hint of pride, turning her head away. But moments later, she turned back, transformed her already perfect penholder back into a cod, and demonstrated the process to the two flustered boys. In the end, Harry and Ron managed to transform their stockfish just 2 minutes before class ended. Phew, Harry sighed in relief. Wiping the cold sweat from his forehead and smiling at Hermione, who merely rolled her eyes in response. The spiral staircase was crowded with students heading to the Great Hall for dinner. Harry and his friends joined the throng, slowly descending. The weather was sweltering, and the breeze blowing into the castle from the tower's corridors was warm. Harry gazed out at the black lake, its surface shimmering like silver silk in the wind, and then at the forbidden forest. As he squinted at the vast, ancient forest, a sudden idea sparked in his mind. The students were abuzz with discussions about the third round of the championship. Unlike the first two rounds, this time the Warriors received no hints, and even Hagrid was in the dark. It seemed that only one person knew the exact details of the competition, Professor Blaine, who had designed the entire event. Harry snapped back to reality, ready to discuss the possibility of a competition in the Forbidden Forest with Hermione and Ron. They speculated that the Warriors might have to hunt the terrifying eight-eyed spiders. However, they were surprised to find that the line on the crowded spiral staircase hadn't moved for quite some time. Ron and Hermione stood on tiptoe, trying to see who was causing the Why? Damn it, Ron muttered, rubbing his stomach. I desperately need chicken drumsticks and a nice pudding. Who's the idiot blocking the way? Don't be so mean, Ron, Hermione said calmly. Maybe a freshman got their foot stuck in one of those trap stairs. Even so, it doesn't change the fact that the unlucky person is a fool, Ron continued sarcastically. It's almost the end of the school year. Harry and I never got tricked in our first year. Harry pursed his lips, avoiding Hermione's teasing gaze with a guilty conscience. Hey, Ron, Lavender, who was in front of them, seemed to have discovered the cause of the traffic jam. She turned around and waved excitedly at Ron. It's your brother, Ron? My brother? Ron was taken aback, glancing at Hermione and Harry. He frowned and shouted, You mean something happened to Fred and George? That's unlikely. They can avoid all the traps with their eyes closed. Not them! Lavender fluttered her eyelashes, her voice filled with excitement that Harry and Hermione couldn't quite understand. It's Percy. He's back, and Professor Blaine is talking to him. The slow procession finally began to move, and students flowed down like a torrent. Harry and the others exchanged confused glances. Percy? Ron frowned. He definitely didn't come back to reminisce about his school days. You know his style. He doesn't want to leave his job for even a second. Could it be related to the competition? Harry speculated, looking at Hermione. Isn't it time for him to communicate with Professor Blaine on behalf of the Ministry of Magic about the next game? But as far as I know, Hermione pondered for a few seconds, Percy was transferred out of the Department of International Magical Cooperation after Barty Crouch died. Oh, where is he now, Ron? I haven't asked, Ron shrugged innocently. There was a moment of silence before the three of them quickened their pace, trying to squeeze through the crowded throng. Upon reaching the third floor, they veered off the staircase and entered the corridor. We'll have a good excuse, won't we, Hermione? Harry asked nervously. I mean, if Professor Blaine asks what we want from him. We have a ready-made excuse, Harry, Hermione replied, her breath steady despite their brisk pace. It was the night Hagrid came back. Oh, Ron raised his eyebrows in surprise. Are you going to have Harry reveal that he saw you-know-who again when his scar hurt? Maybe the situation is just the opposite. It hurts because I saw the mysterious man's scar. Anyway, Hermione slowed her pace, looking at Harry with burning eyes. I can't think of any reason why Professors Blaine and Dumbledore shouldn't know about this. Can I, Harry? End of this chapter. Chapter 9 and 92, Misunderstanding? Please come in, came the steady voice from behind the tightly closed wooden door, causing the three young wizards, who were feeling rather guilty, to take a deep breath simultaneously. Hermione turned to give Harry and Ron a warning look, reminding them not to forget the statements they had just rehearsed. With a determined nod, she pressed her fair hand against the door handle. "Oh, it's you!" exclaimed Percy, who was seated opposite Professor Blaine on the sofa. His surprise was evident, and for some reason, his face flushed slightly. "Why are you here? We should be asking you that question," Ron retorted instinctively, a habit formed from years of sibling rivalry. However, catching Hermione's narrowed eyes, he quickly changed his tone. "Oh, Percy, I'm really surprised. Shouldn't you be working at the Ministry of Magic? Why are you at Hogwarts?" Even Harry could sense that Professor Blaine, with an enigmatic smile, had already guessed that the trio had come to his office to uncover something. Percy, clearly not wanting to be interrupted during his conversation with Professor Blaine, especially by his brother, found himself at a loss for words due to Ron's unexpected question. "This is none of your business, Ron," Percy finally stammered, adopting a stern demeanor. "You should be nicer to your brothers, Percy." Atticus Blaine interjected gently, diffusing the growing tension between the siblings. He then turned his attention to Hermione, who was nervously clenching her fists. "I'm sure you came to see me for something important, rather than enjoying a nice lunch, right?" "Yes, that's right, Professor Blaine," Hermione replied, nodding as she pursed her lips. "It's about Harry. There's something we thought you should know, but Percy, we can wait outside if you need privacy." Atticus looked at Percy, his expression thoughtful. "My lunch seems to be doomed. If what you want to discuss involves confidentiality, then perhaps Harry, Ron, and Hermione should have lunch first. You can't start your afternoon studies on an empty stomach." Percy, preferring a quiet environment for conversation, was about to agree with Professor Blaine's suggestion when he suddenly reconsidered. Glancing at Harry, he changed his mind. "Oh, what I have to say isn't a secret, Professor. They can stay." "Then please, take a seat all three of you," Atticus said, pulling out his wand. With a flick, 3 soft chairs appeared from thin air, and he smiled warmly at the trio. Another wave of his wand set the kettle on the mantelpiece to brew tea, while a drawer at the bottom of the bookshelf opened, releasing a box of snacks. "It's better not to talk on an empty stomach. Hunger can cloud our thoughts. Please, help yourselves to my favorite snack, a gift from a kind fan. It's sugar-free and won't harm your teeth." Hermione, momentarily lost in thought, snapped back to reality to find Harry and Ron watching her expectantly. She glared at them, indicating that the snacks were not her concern. Despite Atticus's hospitality, neither Percy nor Harry seemed inclined to partake in the treats. After enjoying a biscuit and a sip of hot tea, Atticus sighed contentedly. "Now, Percy, you've set aside your busy work to visit Hogwarts and see me. Surely, it's not just for a simple greeting or to reminisce about our teacher-student relationship. What brings you here from afar?" Atticus inquired, his curiosity piqued. "Think, Professor Blaine?" Percy asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the weight of his confession had drained him of all strength. Atticus Blaine, the professor with a reputation for both wisdom and kindness, leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Percy with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "Percy," he began, his voice gentle yet firm, "ambition is not inherently wrong. It can drive us to achieve great things. However, when it blinds us to the truth and leads us to compromise our values, it becomes dangerous." Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched the exchange with bated breath. Harry's mind raced with thoughts of the implications of Umbridge's potential presence at Hogwarts. He knew all too well the kind of chaos she could bring, having heard stories from Sirius and others who had dealt with her in the past. Ron, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at seeing his brother, who had always been the family's golden child, squirm under Professor Blaine's scrutiny. Yet, he also felt a pang of sympathy, knowing how much Percy had struggled to find his place in the world. Hermione, still fuming, struggled to contain her emotions. She knew that Umbridge's appointment was a strategic move by the Ministry to exert control over Hogwarts, and the thought of it made her blood boil. But she respected Professor Blaine too much to interrupt again. "Percy," Atticus continued, "I understand your predicament, but aligning yourself with those who would manipulate and deceive is not the way to find justice or redemption. You must learn to stand by your principles, even when it is difficult." Percy nodded, his face flushed with a mix of shame and gratitude. "Thank you, Professor," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Atticus gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Remember, Percy, it's never too late to make the right choice. And as for Madame Umbridge, rest assured that Professor Dumbledore and I will handle the situation." With that, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances, each silently vowing to keep a close watch on the developments at Hogwarts. They knew that the coming days would be challenging, but with allies like Professor Blaine, they felt a renewed sense of hope. As they left the office, Harry couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. Whatever the Ministry had planned, he was ready to face it head-on, with his friends by his side and the guidance of wise mentors like Atticus Blaine. "Think of yourself, Percy." Hermione's voice cut through the silence that had settled in the office after Percy finished recounting how he ended up at Hogwarts. Her expression was one of growing anger, while Harry and Ron remained puzzled, unable to grasp the full significance of the situation. To them, it seemed straightforward. The Ministry, led by Fudge, wanted to appoint a new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. However, both Professor Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine were dissatisfied with the proposed candidate and had refused the appointment. Yet, judging by the tense expressions on Hermione, Percy, and Professor Blaine's faces, the issue was far more complex than it appeared. Percy stood there, looking blankly at Professor Blaine. But as soon as his eyes met Blaine's piercing gaze, his mental defenses crumbled. "I think this is actually a good idea," Percy whispered, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Gathering his courage, he finally looked up at Harry. "I know there have been some misunderstandings between the Ministry and Hogwarts." End of this chapter. Chapter 993, Misunderstanding of the Shaking Red Shadow. Harry was perplexed. The Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts, particularly Professor Dumbledore, were now almost at odds, a fact Harry was well aware of. Fudge had even used his authority to remove Professor Dumbledore from his position as Chief Wizard of the Wizengamot. But what was the misunderstanding? Why was Percy looking at him and saying this? Harry blinked, sensing something but unable to fully grasp it. "You know, the Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts have always had a good relationship over the years, Professor Blaine," Percy said earnestly. "Minister Fudge fully respects the rights of Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore, and you. However, the Ministry cannot stand by and watch the wizarding world descend into chaos and panic over a—" Percy's eyes flickered. An unconfirmed piece of news. Unconfirmed news causing panic in the wizarding world? At that moment, if Harry still didn't understand what Ron's brother meant, he would be incredibly dense. Clang! Harry knocked over the chair beneath him and stood up, his demeanor more intense than Hermione's, while Ron stared at Percy in disbelief. Clearly, he understood what was being implied. "You think I'm lying?" Harry's face turned pale, and any goodwill he had towards Ron's brother vanished. He retorted sharply, "You think I'm making up lies, don't you, Percy? That Voldemort hasn't risen at all." "Oh, don't be angry, Harry." The tense atmosphere in the office made Percy uneasy. He stood up hesitantly, feeling ashamed under the angry glares from Harry and the others, yet he continued, "I'm not saying you're lying, but there's no evidence, right? Of course, I know you were under a lot of pressure at the time, and you had Hermione and Ron with you. You were all under the lake then. You must have been nervous. So you didn't see through the conspiracy of that dark witch. I mean that evil woman, Vicia Cleopatra. Everything stemmed from her planning and ambitions." "What nonsense!" Harry shouted. "We saw with our own eyes that the Dark Lord had resurrected, and Vicia Cleopatra was merely following his orders. It would be truly sad if you still can't figure this out." "I can prove that what Harry said is absolutely true." Ron glared at his brother. "You came to Hogwarts secretly, right? Dad would never allow you to come here and talk nonsense." Hermione remained silent, glaring coldly at Percy, though she had been the one closest to him in the past. "No evidence." Harry and Ron's rudeness and disrespect irked Percy, and he raised his voice, emphasizing, "You are the only ones who claim this, and no one else can corroborate it. However, the Ministry has obtained Vicia Cleopatra's confession. If you read the Daily Prophet a few months ago, you would know that the Dark Witch has already admitted responsibility for all this." "That woman is lying," Hermione said coldly. "She is covering for the Dark Lord, buying him time to gather his evil forces." "Well said, Hermione," Harry agreed loudly. "The evidence is absurd, Percy. Have you forgotten Barty Crouch and Karkaroff? One was forced to death by Voldemort, and the other was killed by the Death Eaters summoned by Voldemort." "Evidence, Harry," Percy insisted stubbornly. "You are the only one who claims to have seen this. Honestly, it's ridiculous. If you know anything about Mr. Barty Crouch, you would know that he personally sent his good-for-nothing Death Eater son to prison 14 years ago, and his son eventually died in Azkaban. Many Dementors witnessed it, and the Ministry of Magic recorded it. This is your biggest flaw, Harry, Ron, Hermione. Barty Crouch Jr. died a long time ago. Maybe you heard a few words." Atticus Blaine's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Harry, you must have confused Cleopatra's disciples with the Dark Lord and his Death Eaters in your panic." An unimaginable fury surged from deep within Harry, consuming his consciousness. Instinctively, he shook his sleeves, ready to draw his wand and strike Percy. But before he could act, a show interrupted him. "Harry." Professor Blaine's voice redirected Harry's gaze. Yet, when his eyes met the professor's lavender ones, an even fiercer anger flared within him. Why was Professor Blaine silent? He had been present at Voldemort's resurrection, hadn't he? Professor Blaine had the power to reveal Voldemort's return to everyone using that magical surveillance camera, yet he chose not to. The rage birthed terrible thoughts in Harry's mind. He even considered hurling spells at the sofa, or worse, lunging at Professor Blaine's neck. Atticus Blaine's expression turned severe, his sharp eyes piercing into Harry's green ones, which flickered with a scarlet light. The oppressive atmosphere felt like the weight of the deep sea, leaving the young people in the office breathless. "Harry," Hermione's voice broke through the tension. She noticed the terrifying look on Harry's face, and with difficulty asked, "What are you doing?" The sound jolted Harry back to reality. He stepped back, nearly tripping over a chair if Ron hadn't quickly steadied him. Panic and fear etched across Harry's face. "What happened to you just now?" Hermione asked, her concern evident. Harry was breathing heavily, as if he'd just run a marathon. He recalled the dark thoughts that had crossed his mind, attacking Percy for his nonsense and even contemplating harm to Professor Blaine. Harry stammered, unable to explain under the scrutiny of so many eyes. He turned pale, admitting, "I was so angry just now." Ron blinked, confused, having missed the ghostly expression Harry had worn. Atticus's eyes flickered as he rose from the sofa, his gaze settling calmly on Percy. Under that gaze, Percy, who had been arguing with Harry and the others, found himself speechless. "You want me to accept Fudge's suggestion and allow Umbridge to serve at Hogwarts, Percy," Atticus said calmly. "I'm sorry, but I can't agree to that. It goes against my principles." Percy opened his mouth, but Professor Blaine's unspoken authority silenced him. Seeing Percy's reluctance, Atticus sighed inwardly. After a moment's thought, he walked to his desk and retrieved a thick briefcase from a drawer. "Could you do me a favor, Percy?" Atticus asked. "What?" Percy replied, eyeing the briefcase with confusion. "On your way back, stop by Diagon Alley and visit the alchemy workshop of the Learning Machine. Deliver this to Remus and tell him that everything here is fine," Atticus instructed. Percy, still puzzled, reluctantly accepted the briefcase. "I'm sure you'll miss the delicious food at Hogwarts, won't you, Percy?" Atticus said with a gentle smile, patting Percy's shoulder. "Go on, it's not too late yet. If you wait any longer, you'll only have leftovers." Percy left the office, looking distraught, but Harry and the others felt little sympathy for him. "Now, it's your turn." Professor Blaine's voice resonated again, causing Harry's heart to leap into his throat. He even considered following Percy to escape the office. Professor Blaine must have seen his earlier expression. Though he hadn't looked in a mirror, Harry was certain it had been terrifying. End of this chapter. Chapter 994, Frequent Killing Intentions. The feeling was overwhelming. A surge of intense hatred and contempt filled my heart, almost uncontrollable, like an instinct. I wanted nothing more than to tear the person in front of me to pieces. Harry's face was pale, and his shoulders twitched slightly. Hermione and Ron watched him with concern, but Harry couldn't explain his sudden anger. He hoped fervently that Professor Blaine, who had noticed something amiss, would not press the issue. Perhaps it was luck, or maybe Professor Blaine sensed his thoughts, but in any case, he chose not to address Harry's earlier outburst. "Tell me about it," Atticus Blaine said, his breath steady once more, as if the storm of emotions had been nothing but a fleeting dream. He looked at Harry and his friends with a gentle expression, sitting back down to enjoy his sugar-free snack. "Is there anything I need to know?" He gestured for them to sit. Percy's earlier confrontation had left them all shaken. When Professor Blaine asked why they had come to see him, even Hermione was momentarily at a loss. She glanced at Harry, whose face was as pale as snow, and took a deep breath. "The situation is this, Professor," Hermione began, choosing her words carefully. "We went to visit Hagrid one night after he returned. As we left the castle, Harry's scar started to hurt." Atticus raised an eyebrow, aware that this was merely an excuse for the trio to uncover why Percy had sought them out. He already knew the reason, but felt obliged to respond appropriately. "Is that so?" Atticus frowned, looking at Harry. After confirming that Harry's green eyes were still clear, he asked, "Can you tell me more?" "Well," Harry nodded hesitantly and began to recount his experience. There wasn't much to tell. The vision he had seen was blurry, unlike the previous time when he had witnessed Voldemort and Cleopatra committing murder. The only significant detail was that something Professor Blaine had done had unsettled Voldemort. "Professor Blaine," Harry said cautiously after explaining everything, "whatever you're doing, be careful. Voldemort seems to have caught wind of it." "Ah, thanks for the warning, Harry," Atticus nodded appreciatively. Seeing the trio's eager expressions, he smiled and added, "As for what I've done, I'm afraid I can't share that with you just yet." As they left Professor Blaine's office, the hot wind outside brought Harry back to his senses. "Oh, I forgot," he said, somewhat dejectedly. "Why do I keep seeing these things?" "It's your special power, Harry," Ron said, looking at him with awe. "Being able to see what you-know-who is up to. It's like you were born to defeat him." "Don't be ridiculous, Ron," Hermione interjected, giving Ron a warning look. "Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine are more than capable of handling you-know-who." The conversation ended there. Hermione noticed that Harry didn't want to discuss the unsettling expression he had seen on Professor Blaine's face, so she kept her worries to herself. The three of them quickened their pace toward the Great Hall, still fuming over Percy's earlier betrayal. "I swear I'll punch his nose in!" Ron exclaimed angrily. "How could he think we're liars? Who would joke about you-know-who? He's blinded by power." They had spent quite some time in Professor Blaine's office. By the time they reached the Great Hall, most students had finished their lunch and returned to their respective common rooms. They didn't find Percy at the Gryffindor table, but Ginny approached them with a concerned look. Atticus Blaine adjusted his school bag after noticing the others looking around. "What's going on? Why are you all just coming down for lunch now?" Ginny asked, twirling a strand of her fiery red hair. Her fair skin glowed delicately in the sunlight streaming through the window, momentarily distracting Harry. He quickly refocused and asked, "Have you seen Percy, Ginny?" "Oh, of course," Ginny replied, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. "I saw him coming down the stairs. I said, 'Hello,' but he ignored me and just walked down the hallway." She studied the expressions of Harry and the others, frowning slightly. "What happened?" Percy looked like he'd suffered a major blow. "He deserves it," Ron muttered angrily, voicing his opinion bluntly. Although Harry and Hermione agreed, they hesitated to make any harsh comments in front of Ron and Ginny. "I still don't quite understand," Ron said as they reached the Gryffindor table. He grabbed a bagel from a pile of plates, took a bite, and washed it down with a gulp of pumpkin juice. Sighing with relief, he placed his hand on a pie and looked at Hermione. "Percy helped Fudge to get a teaching position at Hogwarts to become the assistant minister. But why would Fudge do this? What benefit does he gain by sending someone to teach defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts?" "The Minister of Magic is planning to send someone into Hogwarts." Ginny's eyes widened in shock. "What is he planning to do? Is he trying to interfere with Hogwarts?" "Interfering with Hogwarts?" Harry asked nervously. "Is that why Fudge is going to such lengths to get people into the school?" Ginny hesitated, glancing at the silent Hermione. "Well, I think, what else could he be planning?" "But even if Umbridge comes in, what can she do?" Ron asked, chewing on his beef pie. "With Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore here, she can't cause any trouble, right?" "That's not necessarily true, Ron," Hermione replied, her tone calm, but her expression troubled. "If a Ministry of Magic spy enters the school, she can monitor Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine. We all know the Minister fears them most. Secondly, she could spread the Ministry's narrative that the mysterious man hasn't been resurrected and that everything is peaceful. If people believe this, then Professor Dumbledore, Professor Blaine, and we will be seen as liars, which is exactly what Cornelius Fudge wants. Even at Hogwarts, there are people who doubt this." "I can't understand," Ron said, shaking his head seriously. "Even someone like Malfoy didn't object, so why are there so many skeptics?" "Because people are scared, Ron," Ginny answered, casting a worried glance at Harry, who had pursed his lips. "Will the Ministry give up?" Harry asked, trying to control his emotions. Professor Blaine has clearly rejected Fudge, and he just turned down Percy. Will the Ministry of Magic stop interfering with Hogwarts? Hermione's silence was all the answer Harry needed. The sun continued to shine brightly outside the window, and the gentle breeze, along with the chirping insects and birds, created a false sense of harmony. Harry, who had just felt the world was too peaceful, was now beginning to feel the turmoil following Voldemort's return. A dark thought suddenly crossed his mind. Should he kill Dolores Umbridge? The idea frightened him, causing a cold sweat to break out. Even Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine wouldn't dare to speak of killing Ministry employees. What was he thinking? What on earth had he done to be so foolish as to entertain such an idea? What was wrong with him? This wasn't the first time. Previously, in Professor Blaine's office, he had harbored murderous intentions towards both Percy and Professor Blaine. While he could somewhat justify his feelings towards Percy, his animosity towards Professor Blaine was utterly irrational. Yet Harry knew that his dark thoughts at that moment were not mere illusions. Harry? Hermione leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern, while Ginny, sitting across from her, also wore a slightly pale expression. Nothing, Harry lied, aware that the two perceptive girls had already sensed something was amiss. He lowered his head in guilt, focusing on the remnants of food on his plate. Eat quickly. The afternoon class is about to start. End of this chapter. Chapter 995, Monologue Woo. The deafening whistle of the train jolted Percy from his brooding thoughts. As he regained his senses, he noticed that the scenery outside the window had transformed. The endless green mountains and the shimmering blue lakes nestled between the valleys had given way to vast fields and pastures dotted with cattle and sheep. Despite the bright sunshine illuminating the open landscape, Percy felt no relief. He shifted slightly on the cushioned seat of the compartment and glanced back towards the direction of their departure. The majestic silhouette of Hogwarts had vanished completely from view, leaving not even a shadow behind. "Hey," he sighed heavily, the sound lost amidst the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails. Percy bent forward, burying his face in his hands. Professor Atticus Blaine had not been persuaded by his arguments. Percy couldn't deny that he had anticipated this outcome, yet Professor Blaine's decisiveness, without even offering an explanation for his refusal, caught him off guard. In Percy's mind, Professor Blaine had always been supportive. During his tenure as an assistant to the elderly Mr. Barty Crouch, Percy had managed the daily operations of the Department of International Magical Cooperation single-handedly when Mr. Crouch went on sick leave. It was a challenging time, fraught with countless trivial and tedious issues. Professor Blaine had offered him guidance, advising him to seek his father's counsel and to visit the heads of various departments. Percy had followed this advice, albeit half-heartedly, and until he was ousted from the Department of International Magical Cooperation, his workload had eased considerably. "Why won't you help me again?" he murmured, his voice muffled by his open palms. It was merely a matter of allowing Miss Umbridge to teach at Hogwarts. The young wizards needed a defense against the dark arts professor, and it seemed like a perfect solution. Percy didn't want to dwell on why Professor Blaine had refused, but the reality was that he found himself in an even more dire predicament. He had failed the minister's test, dashing any hopes of becoming the minister's assistant. Instead, he was condemned to waste his precious time in the Ma Ren's office, a place where his duties were limited to wiping tables and sweeping floors. Perhaps his embarrassing situation would only change with the appointment of a new minister. He rubbed his face with his hands, wiping away the moisture from his eyes, which had become teary from the sting of frustration. Once again, Percy cast a vacant gaze out the window. What should he do next? Not only had he failed to secure Professor Blaine's support, but he had also angered his father. Ron had been right. His father had vehemently opposed his visit to Hogwarts, leading to a heated argument between them. Thinking of his father only fueled Percy's confusion and anger. He couldn't comprehend the benefit of opposing the powerful Minister of Magic, if not for the fact that he had always been... Boom, boom, boom. The sudden knock on the glass door of the compartment interrupted his thoughts. Percy turned his head to see a smiling woman with dimples standing there, a cart parked in front of her. As she noticed Percy looking at her, she smiled warmly and opened the compartment door. "Sweetheart, would you like to buy some food from the trolley?" she asked. "Oh, thank you. No, I brought my own," Percy replied out of habit. But as he spoke, he realized he was no longer a student at Hogwarts. He didn't have one of his mother's homemade pies with him. Moreover, he wasn't as financially constrained as he had been during his school days. Working at the Ministry of Magic had allowed him to save some money, although the witch selling snacks showed no displeasure at Percy's initial refusal. She simply nodded with a smile and began to close the door of the compartment. "Wait a moment," Percy called out, his eyes scanning the wide array of food on the cart. He suddenly remembered that he hadn't followed Professor Braine's advice to have lunch at school and had left Hogwarts directly. Now, hunger gnawed at him, but he was relieved to find some galleons in his pocket. "Changed your mind, dear?" the slightly plump witch asked, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. "Oh, yes," Percy replied, standing up from his seat to examine the snacks. The cart was laden with an assortment of treats: Peppa Pig, every flavor beans, puffball bubblegum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pies, cauldron cakes, licorice wands, and candies from the Bee Duke candy store. He couldn't recall if he had ever bought anything from this witch's mobile shop during his 7 years at Hogwarts. If he had, it was likely only a few times, for reasons he preferred not to dwell on. "Are you sure you want to buy so much, dear?" The witch's surprised voice jolted Percy from his reverie. He blinked, realizing he had amassed a small mountain of food on the seat beside him, far more than he could consume alone. "If I buy all of it, how much will it cost?" Percy asked cautiously, biting his lip. "The prices have gone up recently, dear," the witch replied, causing Percy's heart to skip a beat. Before he could worry further, she added, 16 silver sickles and 9 bronze nuts. "Oh," Percy exhaled in relief, pulling out a galleon from his pocket with a sense of satisfaction. "Here you go. No need for change." "Thank you, generous gentleman," the witch said with a smile, accepting the galleon and kindly closing the compartment door for him. As the sound of the cart faded away, the smile on Percy's lips lingered, and his earlier melancholy began to dissipate. Eagerly, he returned to his seat and started sampling the food. Though he had tasted most of these common treats before, hunger made them seem sweeter, and he found himself devouring them with a ravenous appetite. Despite not being particularly fond of these children's foods, Percy had never experienced such abundance. During his time at Hogwarts, most of his belongings, including magic books, cauldrons, scales, telescopes, and wizard robes, were hand-me-downs from Bill and Charlie. When he first arrived at Hogwarts, the only new item he owned was his wand, and his pet owl was a gift from his parents after he became a prefect in his 5th year. In his family, poverty gnawed at everyone's self-esteem, yet no one dared to speak of it publicly, a silent cowardice. Percy tore into the snacks almost greedily. It wasn't that his family couldn't live well. Their poverty wasn't solely due to having many siblings. The root of the problem lay with his father, whose greatest hobby was tinkering with useless Muggle artifacts. He never put much effort into his work, lacked ambition, refused to curry favor with superiors, and was content to remain in a trivial department, ignoring the hardships at home. In contrast, Percy felt he had done nothing wrong. Since joining the Ministry of Magic, he had poured all his energy into his work, hoping for a successful career, to fulfill his ambitions, and to provide his family with a more dignified life. Atticus Blaine was determined to ensure his mother no longer had to worry about money. To achieve this, he needed to win the favor of the Minister of Magic, which is why he found himself at Hogwarts today. As he sat there, a piece of chocolate cake lodged in his throat, causing a moment of panic. The suffocating sensation made Atticus curl up, his body twitching slightly. With great effort, he reached for the glass of water on the table. After taking a gulp, he finally managed to breathe more easily. Exhausted, Atticus slumped back into his chair. Perhaps due to the recent ordeal, his eyes, framed by his thin face, were slightly moist. He gasped for air, his gaze drifting to the white clouds floating outside the window, his eyes devoid of life. Why did no one understand his struggles? End of this chapter. Chapter 996, Interlude. "Your snacks are very delicious, ma'am," Percy complimented the plump witch who sold snacks and also worked part-time cleaning the carriage. He nodded and smiled at her as he passed by, then disembarked from the train. The Hogwarts Express had stopped at Diagon Alley Station. Some passengers were heading to King's Cross Station. As Percy maneuvered through the throng of people and emerged outside the station, he noticed the sky had dimmed, with a large red sun hovering over the mountain tops. A quick glance at his watch revealed it was already 7 o'clock. Percy's gaze fell on the file bag tucked under his arm, and he hesitated. Typically, wizards would have returned home from work by now, perhaps even finished dinner, and were relaxing in their gardens, enjoying the evening breeze. Percy was uncertain if Professor Lupin was still working in the workshop that had recently gained fame. If not, he would have to return tomorrow, but he had work obligations then. Although he had little to do at the Ministry of Magic, skipping work was not in his nature. Moreover, despite his failed mission to Hogwarts, he still needed to report the results to the Minister of Magic. After a moment of indecision, Percy resolved to try his luck. The atmosphere at home, tense after last night's conflict, made him crave fresh air. As night descended, many shops had already closed, and those still open with dim oil lights were not bustling with business. The few pedestrians on the street hurried along, reluctant to linger due to the recent decline in public safety in the wizarding world. Even in Diagon Alley, the presence of wrongdoers increased after sunset. Percy briefly considered the cause of the security issues, but forced himself to stop dwelling on it. Percy was startled when he glimpsed a shadowy figure darting from a nearby alley. Before the cloaked figure could approach, Percy drew his wand and pointed it at the stranger, speaking sternly. "Stop! Who are you, and what do you want?" "Oh, calm down, sir," the cloaked wizard replied, his accent hinting at foreign origins. His skin was rough, and his deep-set eyes were a cloudy blue. Despite being confronted, the wizard remained unfazed, offering a smooth, ingratiating smile. "I'm not a criminal, sir. I'm just a— Oh, if you're interested, I can introduce my merchandise to you." "Merchandise?" Percy eyed the blue-eyed wizard suspiciously. After confirming there was no immediate threat, he slowly returned his wand to his pocket, raised his chin slightly, and scrutinized the mysterious wizard. "So you're a businessman?" "Your wisdom is admirable, sir," the blue-eyed wizard replied carefully. "So are you interested?" "What do you sell?" "Some antiques. Please come this way, sir." The blue-eyed wizard seemed encouraged by Percy's curiosity. He led Percy to a wall, then lifted his large black cloak to reveal a box hanging from his waist. Opening the box, he displayed his wares to Percy. The interior of the box was much larger than it appeared from the outside. As the box opened, the pallets unfolded, revealing a stall in front of Percy within seconds. It contained several sets of shiny silver armor, brooches, snuff bottles, jeweled rings, fine porcelain, and various odds and ends. The blue-eyed wizard placed the box on the ground, stepped out from behind the stall, and gestured invitingly to Percy. "Good quality and cheap, sir, all from once reputable wizarding families." Percy remained silent, his gaze drifting over each piece of merchandise, all of which appeared quite ancient. Although Percy did not hail from a wealthy family, the Weasley lineage was one of the 28 pure-blood families. The Weasley bloodline had spread throughout the wizarding world, and many of its members came from affluent backgrounds. Percy had accompanied his parents on visits to these relatives, observed their collections, and listened to their boastful introductions, which had given him a certain appreciation for antiques. In his estimation, not all the items the blue-eyed Ezard presented were fakes. However, about 95% of them were worthless junk. "Look at the quality of this ring, sir. It hails from Desmer, a solitary little noble in Transylvania. This emerald ring is their heirloom. I bought it for 30 galleons. If you find it appealing, I'll let it go for just 35 galleons, the blue-eyed wizard said. Percy scrutinized the ring in silence. The wizard's words were a mix of truth and falsehood. He might have acquired the ring from a destitute noble, but likely only the setting was genuine. The dark yellow setting probably contained a certain amount of mithril, which was indeed valuable, but the gemstone set within it was entirely fake. The blue-eyed wizard continued to extol the ring's history to Percy, but suddenly— "What's your name?" Percy interrupted the wizard's chatter. Tudun Colkant. The blue-eyed wizard replied instinctively, but as soon as he uttered his name, he became wary and eyed Percy suspiciously. Why do you ask, sir? Well, Mr. Colkant. Percy, taller than the wizard, looked down with an air of indifference and arrogance. I assume you have a license issued by the Ministry of Magic? License? Colkant was momentarily taken aback, then his expression turned cold. What does that have to do with you? Oh, what a coincidence. Percy sniffed disdainfully. I'm from the Ministry of Magic. Colkant squinted at the young man before him. Are you from the executive department? That's none of your concern. Percy blushed slightly, pursing his lips as he spoke in a low voice. According to the law, Mr. Colkant, if you lack the necessary sales license, you'll need to pay a fine. If you can't pay, you'll be sent to Azkaban. Hey, wait! Colkant paid no heed to Percy's reprimand. Realizing he was dealing with a ministry official, he swiftly waved his wand, causing all the goods displayed to Percy to leap back into the box. He then attached the box to his belt, rolled up his cloak, and prepared to leave. Hey, I'm talking to you! Percy scowled, reaching out to grab Colkant's shoulder, but whoosh! The black robe swirled, and a wand emerged from beneath the cloak, aimed directly at Percy's eyes. There was no respect for ministry officials in Colkant's murky blue eyes. Instead, a cold light flickered. I advise you not to bring trouble upon yourself and your family, boy, Colkant warned. Faced with the trembling wand tip and Colkant's suddenly menacing face, Percy froze momentarily, but then anger surged within him. He glared at Colkant, contemplating the possibility of dodging the first spell. But before Percy could act, a flash of red light zipped past his shoulder, singeing a few strands of his red hair, and struck Colkant's raised wrist with precision. The rogue, unwilling to abide by the law, was sent flying as if hit by a powerful punch. Boom! Colkant crashed heavily to the ground and did not rise again. The box containing the contraband shattered against the wall, scattering its contents across the floor. The wand soared over Percy's shoulder, landing deftly in someone's hand. Bah, scum! Sirius spat, striding purposefully toward the unconscious Colkante. With a nudge of his toe, he rolled Colkante over. After confirming the man was indeed unconscious, Sirius flicked his wand, conjuring a thin rope that securely bound Colkante. He glanced at the scattered antiques strewn across the ground, and with a casual wave of his wand, they floated back into their box. Turning to face the bewildered Percy, Sirius offered a smile and a shrug. To borrow a phrase from Alastor, Percy, constant vigilance. Things aren't as peaceful as they once were. Sirius? Percy gasped, taking a few deep breaths to steady himself. What are you doing here? Are you on duty to maintain law and order? Actually, like you, I'm off work, Sirius replied, stepping onto Colkante's back and lifting the lunchbox he held. I'm here to bring food to Remus. I just came out of the leaky cauldron and happened to see you. By the way, what brings you here? End of this chapter. Chapter 997. The current status of the workshop. Bringing food to Remus? Percy's attention was drawn to the package in his left hand by Sirius's words, leaving him momentarily stunned. Whether at the ministry or at home, he had heard about the thriving success of Professor Blaine and Professor Lupin's learning machine workshop. According to estimates from the Department of International Magical Cooperation, the taxes expected from the learning machine workshop this year would cause the Ministry of Magic's annual business tax rate to increase by several percentage points compared to last year. So, could it be that Professor Lupin, who managed such a large workshop, had nowhere to eat? Percy had learned a thing or two from his career at the Ministry of Magic. He chose not to point out the irony, but instead mumbled, I also want to visit the machine workshop to learn. Sirius's comment made Percy realize that Professor Lupin might still be working overtime at the workshop. Under Sirius's surprised gaze, he raised the file bag in his hand. Professor Blaine asked me to deliver this to Professor Lupin. Atticus? Sirius was even more puzzled. Isn't he at Hogwarts? Percy was relieved that Sirius hadn't heard about the task assigned to him by the Minister of Magic. Otherwise, Sirius might not have been so kind. I have some ministry matters to deal with. I just came back from Hogwarts. Professor Blaine asked me to give this document to Professor Lupin on my way back. What are we going to do with him? Percy was eager to change the subject and avoid delving deeper into this topic. He glanced at the criminal under Sirius's foot, hoping to shift the conversation. Some of Percy's tricks were not lost on Sirius, but he chose not to pry into Percy's secrets. After raising his eyebrows slightly and giving Percy a long look, Sirius turned his attention to Colcant with disdain. "Well, I'm afraid I don't have time to escort him to the ministry now. I have." Sirius glanced back at the still-lit leaky cauldron. "I can ask Tom, the bar owner, to keep an eye on him for now. He has an owl. I'll write a letter to the ministry, and Amelia will send someone to pick him up." As he spoke, he flicked his wand, causing Colcant to float up and follow him, trotting across the white cobblestone street and into the backyard of the leaky cauldron. 10 minutes later, an owl spread its wings and took off from the yard. After circling twice in the sky, it disappeared into the dark blue night. "Come on, Percy." Sirius waved at Percy, who was still in a daze in the yard, and called out with a smile. "You're from Hogwarts, Percy. Have you seen Harry?" Sirius led Percy towards the industrial area of Diagon Alley. He knew that Percy's situation at the ministry wasn't great, much like his own, so he avoided discussing work-related matters. "Oh, Harry. Yes, I saw him, and Ron and Hermione." Percy's eyes flickered, and his cheeks flushed. Not only had he met the three of them, but he had also nearly had a confrontation with them in Professor Blaine's office. However, he couldn't share this with Sirius, so he simply nodded and stammered. They were, in good spirits. "But you know, Sirius, I was in a hurry to get back, so I didn't talk to them much." "Is that so?" Sirius glanced at Percy sideways, frowning slightly, but said nothing more. He had been Percy's defense against the dark arts professor and had lived with Arthur's family for a time, so he knew Arthur's third son quite well. In the mild-tempered Weasley family, Percy was considered the most ambitious, making no secret of his determination to advance in his career after joining the Ministry of Magic. To be honest, Sirius did not particularly appreciate Percy's style. While becoming a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Magic was not an unreasonable dream, Percy's problem was that he was somewhat blinded by the desire for power. Atticus Blaine struggled to discern what truly mattered. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on Sirius and Percy, prompting them to delve deeper into the alleys of the industrial district. As they ventured further, a deafening roar shattered the night's tranquility. This area was far from deserted. Even under the cloak of darkness, workers bustled in and out of the workshops. Percy trailed behind Sirius to a park, the heart of the industrial zone, teeming with workshops. Despite the activity, 3 massive workshops were still under construction in a vast open space. A dozen wizards orchestrated steel beams into the air with their wands, positioning them with precision. Percy finally tore his gaze from the smoke-belching chimneys and focused on the solitary office building within the factory. Almost every office was illuminated, shadows of figures flitting behind the windows. Guarding the factory gate were not only wizards, but also goblins, who seemed well acquainted with Sirius. With a few words about Percy's identity and purpose, the astute guards granted them entry. Meanwhile, workers queued at the gate, subjected to honesty probes and endoscopes before gaining access. "The security here seems even tighter than at the Ministry of Magic," Percy exclaimed, astonished by the rigorous checks. "In fact, the security measures are more comprehensive than they appear," Sirius replied with a smile, gesturing towards the workshop roofs and the dense pine trees and bushes lining the park wall. Skilled wizards discreetly monitor the workshops from those spots. Plus, the grounds are safeguarded by powerful spells, including the anti-apparition charm. I wager that even if all the Aurors from the Ministry of Magic attempted a forceful entry, they wouldn't breach these defenses. "I don't understand," Percy admitted, bewildered by Sirius's explanation. "Why go to such lengths?" "You'll have to ask Atticus," Sirius shrugged. "It was his directive. Remus invested considerable effort into fortifying the workshop's defenses as if preparing for war." The air carried a burning scent, not from a fire, but from the intense atmosphere that made Percy feel aflame. Everyone in the park moved with urgency, no one leisurely strolling, but rather jogging purposefully to their destinations. Observing the workers, administrators, and alchemy experts, all seemingly engrossed in endless tasks, Percy felt a pang of envy. It wasn't just their busyness he envied, but the palpable sense of purpose and upliftment that eluded even the Ministry of Magic. They seem to love their work, Percy remarked, following Sirius towards the brightly lit office building, his gaze trailing a group of wizards in respectable attire hurrying towards a workshop. "Oh, absolutely," Sirius replied, half jokingly, half seriously. "Remus offers them generous salaries. The most basic workers earn over 400 galleons a year, while experts and mid to high-level business personnel earn salaries comparable to Hogwarts professors. Honestly, if the ministry doesn't give me a raise, I'd rather be a security guard here." 400 galleons as the minimum salary? Percy's eyes widened in disbelief. This was more than he earned at the ministry, yet it was the lowest standard here. Sirius, amused by Percy's astonishment, patted him on the shoulder and nudged him up the stairs. "Come on, I bet there's more to see. Remus is starving. Isn't there a place to eat around here? Why does Remus need you to bring him food?" Percy asked, still in shock and unable to hide his curiosity. Sirius's expression turned slightly awkward, and he cleared his throat twice. "Ahem. Well, you see, Remus has been living with me for a while now. He's grown quite accustomed to creatures cooking." End of this chapter. Chapter 998, The Secret of Success. Productivity, production capacity. I need more production capacity. Inform those slackers in the production department that they must increase their output by another 3 percentage points before June. If they fail, I'll recommend to Mr. Lupin that we let go of those who are holding us back. Blast it, those greedy Swiss suppliers want to hike the price of raw materials by 5%. This is unacceptable. I must negotiate with them immediately. I can't delay any longer. Radel, I'll head home tonight, pack my bags, and rush to Switzerland. Meanwhile, please go to the Ministry of Magic and secure permission for me to use the cross-border flu network. The shipment to Hungary was seized by the local Ministry of Magic? Why? Oh, they suspect smuggled goods and want to inspect the boxes. I know what they're up to, just looking for a bribe. Mr. Blaine should really send a fireball their way. But of course, he won't. We can't breach the contract, so I'll write to Anya and have her appease those opportunists. Those blasted Americans altered our contract. Just wait and see. I'll make them understand the consequences. Unless they pay the penalty, their goods will remain stuck at the border for another 2 weeks. Personnel? Sorry, Santis. I have no one available to assist you. I can't even find a goblin, let alone a wizard. And don't even think about pressuring me. Mr. Lupin has assigned me to develop the market in Egypt, and I must leave early tomorrow morning. When will I ever get some help? In each open office, wizards with flushed faces and sweaty brows bustled about. Percy felt as though he had stepped onto a different kind of battlefield. Every wizard exuded passion and energy, creating an atmosphere more vibrant than even the Ministry of Magic, known for its elite wizards. Having worked at the ministry for nearly a year, Percy was all too familiar with the slacking off that plagued many officials there. The scene before him was chaotic, yet it possessed a captivating allure that deeply intrigued Percy. Watching the busy wizards, his eyes reflected a mix of fascination and envy. He was only brought back to reality when Sirius spoke. "People here are very passionate, aren't they?" Sirius remarked with a smile, observing another group of alchemy experts hurrying out the door. "Yes, everyone is so focused," Percy replied instinctively. He glanced at Sirius and noticed the intense gaze directed at him. Blushing, Percy took a deep breath. But how did Professor Lupin manage this? Percy wondered aloud. How does he keep everyone so motivated? "Oh, it's actually some advice from Atticus," Sirius began, leading the way down the corridor to the second floor. "First and foremost, generous compensation is crucial. According to Atticus, most people don't have lofty ideals or grand dreams. They work hard to improve their lives and make things easier. So if you offer a generous salary, you can ignite their enthusiasm." Percy pondered these words, questioning whether he was among the few who held lofty beliefs and dreams, as Professor Blaine had mentioned. "Secondly," Sirius continued, taking the stairs 3 at a time to the second floor, "be fair and just. This place isn't like other pure-blood family businesses, where family members do the easiest work and receive the highest pay." Atticus advised Remus to establish a clear promotion path for employees. Most of the people you saw in the office were the young woman at the other desk, who blushed even more as she accepted it with a shy smile. Atticus Blaine had been selected from the workers on the production line when Remus first took over the workshop. He was exceptionally capable and eager to learn, quickly proving himself ready to take on responsibilities independently. The workshop boasted a fair, just, and efficient promotion system, something Percy had always dreamed of seeing in the Ministry of Magic. A wistful expression crossed Percy's face as he listened to Sirius. And then, Sirius continued, carefully balancing the lunchbox as he ascended the stairs from the 3rd and 4th floors to the 5th. Atticus also taught Remus many things, like showing employees the workshop's potential and instilling pride in their work. They implemented strict supervision and punishment measures to prevent corruption, unlike what we see in the Ministry of Magic. Oh, and they genuinely care for their employees. You might not know this, Percy, but if an employee's spouse, children, or parents fall ill, the workshop covers all expenses for treatment at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. If an employee's child shows enough magical talent, the workshop subsidizes their tuition at Hogwarts. As you know, Percy, Hogwarts offers limited subsidies for children from poor families, barely enough for second-hand goods. But if you work here and are struggling financially, your child will receive both the Hogwarts subsidy and an additional one from the workshop, allowing them to study at Hogwarts with dignity. Percy followed Sirius up to the 6th floor of the office building, listening in amazement to Sirius's account of the workshop. The floor was similar to those below, except the spacious corridors were filled with wizards queuing up. They all want to see Remus, Sirius said, nodding towards the group of wizards clutching documents, anxiously checking their watches. If I queued normally, it would take about 2 hours to see Remus. Luckily, I have a little privilege. The last time Percy had seen Professor Lupin was the previous summer. At that time, Lupin had been recovering at St. Mungo's after a confrontation with Greyback's gang of werewolves. During a brief stay at Percy's house for the Quidditch World Cup, Lupin had seemed like a middle-aged wizard, jobless and somewhat lost. But now, in the simply decorated office, the wizard behind the desk exuded a commanding presence that even made Percy, accustomed to high-ranking ministry officials, feel a bit intimidated. Remus was taken aback by the sudden appearance of Sirius and Percy. He glanced at the lunchbox in Sirius's hand, then at the pretty girl with a slightly flushed face at another desk, a complex smile playing on his lips. "Excuse me, I need a little private time. Can we discuss this later?" Remus said to the wizard who had been reporting to him. The man quickly left, thoughtfully closing the door behind him. "Tell me, if I write to Atticus and tell him you're delivering dinner to Amelia every day, what do you think Atticus will do?" Remus teased, stepping out from behind his desk to address the grinning Sirius. "I think you must have misunderstood something, Remus," Sirius replied, placing a dinner from the lunchbox casually in front of Remus. "I'm just concerned that my old friend might be too busy with work and forget to have dinner." As he spoke, Sirius carefully brought the remaining food to the young woman, who accepted it with a shy smile, her cheeks turning a deeper shade of red. Amelia tried to maintain her composure, but the flush on her fair neck betrayed her nerves. "I brought you a copy, by the way," she said. "Atticus Blaine asked Remus and me to look after you. However, Remus might not have the time to help you settle in, so I had to come here myself." Even Percy could detect the mischievous glint in Sirius's smile. He glanced at Amelia with curiosity. From their conversation, it was clear that this beautiful girl had some connection with Professor Blaine, though they were not romantically involved. "Percy, what are you doing with Sirius?" Remus's curious voice snapped Percy out of his thoughts. "Oh, we ran into each other in Diagon Alley," Percy replied, his tone slightly reserved. The events he had witnessed from the workshop door to this office had deepened his respect for the former Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. He handed a file to Remus. "I went to Hogwarts for some ministry business, and Professor Blaine asked me to deliver this to you on my way back. He also wanted me to let you know that there are no objections from the people of Honoploth." End of this chapter. Chapter 999, Flower of Youth. "Ah, that's it! Thank you so much, Percy!" Remus exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with understanding. He eagerly began to open the file bag. Not only was Percy curious about its contents, but even Sirius, who had been engrossed in a lively conversation with Amelia, leaned over with interest. "What is that, Remus?" he asked. "Oh, you know how short-handed I am here, Sirius," Remus replied, breaking the seal and struggling to pull out a thick stack of parchment. "We lack not only skilled workers, but also high-end talents, R&D personnel skilled in alchemy and business experts adept at communication and negotiation. Most of the outstanding Hogwarts graduates are snapped up by the Ministry of Magic, making it difficult to find enough talent in the UK. I've tried offering high salaries to lure people from other workshops, but it's tough. Many are direct descendants of wizard families and won't leave for gold. I've sifted through thousands of resumes to find exceptional candidates who, after training, can take on significant responsibilities. They could handle market development, business affairs, and liaise with the Ministry of Magic in various countries. Amelia, I might need you to send this young man an employment notice and ask them to return within 3 days. Oh, damn, Atticus is too tight. With a loud bang, the parchments in the file bag scattered everywhere. Percy, who had been listening intently to Remus, was startled by the flying parchments and stepped back, instinctively catching a piece that seemed to aim directly for his face. "Oh, that's too bad," Remus muttered, blinking his tired eyes. He pulled out his wand and waved it at the parchments, which obediently returned to his hands like birds returning to their nests, leaving only one in Percy's grasp. "Thank you, Percy," Remus said casually, reaching for the parchment Percy held. However, it didn't budge. "Percy?" Remus asked, puzzled, applying more force, but still unable to retrieve it. The parchment obscured Percy's face, so Remus shifted to see around it. When he caught sight of Percy's tearful expression, he was taken aback. Holborn, London. As the window swung open, a refreshing breeze swept into the room, tussling a few strands of chestnut curls that lay against a creamy white collarbone. Fortunately, this rental area, far from the bustling commercial center, remained untouched by the city's neon glow. Late at night, the small, orderly buildings were shrouded in darkness, allowing the faint starlight to pierce through and illuminate the girl's bright eyes. A soft sigh mingled with the breeze as a slightly melancholic gaze settled on a pot of cherry blossoms swaying gently on the windowsill. She had faced significant resistance to coming to London for work. Her family wanted her to stay in Gloucestershire, manage the family farm, and marry the farmer's son, who owned the larger neighboring land. Normally, she would have eventually given in, but a job advertisement in the Daily Prophet offered her an escape from her stifling life. The position was highly respectable, with a salary and benefits so generous that even her stubborn family hesitated to refuse. It gave her the chance to step into London once more. After lengthy negotiations, she finally secured her family's reluctant consent to try her luck at the workshop interview. However, if she wasn't accepted, she would have to return to Gloucestershire and remain on that desolate farm for the rest of her days of time. A week had passed since the interview concluded, and the confidence she had felt from the interviewer's satisfied smile was steadily waning. Each passing hour became an unbearable torment. Should I write a letter to Professor Lupin? She wondered, lightly biting her lower lip. Her eyes drifted to the blank letter paper and the quill pen filled with ink on the desk beside her. This thought had been lingering for days. For the past 3 days, she had been torn about whether to reach out to Professor Lupin. The initial shock of learning that the former defense boss against the dark arts professor had become the head of a renowned workshop had long faded. She had first hesitated when she saw the workshop's recruitment ad in the Daily Prophet, unsure whether to submit her resume. Now, she was grappling with the idea of using a back door to gain an advantage. During the interview, the stern interviewer had emphasized the workshop's commitment to fairness, making it clear that anyone working there would need to uphold this value. The idea she was contemplating seemed to contradict that principle. After a prolonged silence, she moved from the windowsill to her desk. A single line of text was already written on the unfolded letter paper. She stared at it for a long time before crumpling the paper into a ball and tossing it into the trash can at her feet. Resolute, she pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. The moon had quietly ascended into the sky and was now descending on the other side. The small, cozy room was filled with a gentle breeze, yet it had become the last illuminated space among thousands of darkened windows. The words on the letter paper still hadn't progressed beyond the first line, and the wastebasket at her feet was already brimming with discarded paper balls. A strong gust of wind blew, causing the light blue cotton curtains to rustle. Simultaneously, the sound of screeching brakes and farewells reached her ears. Who could be here so late? She wondered. Her misty eyes drifted from the letter paper to the window, where she noticed her pot of cherry grass had been knocked over by the wind. It was wedged between the two iron bars of the security window, swaying precariously. "Oh!" she exclaimed softly, rushing to the windowsill to rescue the delicate plant before it could fall. As she sighed in relief, she caught a glimpse of rapidly departing taillights from the corner of her eye, and her expression changed. "The night bus?" she murmured, leaning over to peer downstairs. But the passenger from the departing night bus had already entered the building, and she couldn't see who it was. "Is there a wizard here?" she wondered, frowning slightly as she hugged the pot of cherry grass tightly. Though she lived in the countryside, she was well aware of the recent tensions in the British wizarding world through letters from classmates and the Daily Prophet. She had also heard about the alarming warnings Professor Dumbledore had shared at Hogwarts, which was one of the main reasons her mother was reluctant for her to leave the countryside. Thump, thump, thump. She quickly removed her shoes and dashed to the clothes rack, retrieving her wand from the pocket of her wizard robe hanging there. Slowly retreating to the window, she waved her wand to extinguish the desk lamp, then stood vigilantly, staring at the door. The room plunged into an oppressive silence, broken only by her heavy breathing and the hurried footsteps approaching in the corridor. "They're coming for me, but how could that be? This building is full of muggles renting short-term apartments. She was the only wizard who had come for her. But how could this be happening?" In a matter of moments, the girl's forehead was slick with sweat. She stared at the closed door in horror, her mind a fog of confusion. What should I do? What if I'm attacked? Professor Blaine had taught me some defensive spells, but I've nearly forgotten everything. Boom, boom, boom. The knocking on the door was like a heavy hammer striking her heart, making her feel as though she was descending into a personal hell. Yet, the voice that followed pulled her back to reality. "Is that you, Penelope? Are you in there? Are you asleep? I just saw a light on in the house." The sound of someone entering made Penelope tremble, and the flower pot she was holding slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor with a loud crash. "What's going on? What was that noise?" Percy's voice was tense with concern as he called from outside the door. Penelope opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Only silent tears streamed down her face. A sharp noise echoed through the building late at night, accompanied by a few muttered curses. Percy burst into the room, his eyes darting nervously to the girl by the windowsill. He saw the broken flower pot at her feet and the tears that stained her cheeks. A cool breeze drifted through the room, a gentle reminder of the innocence of youth. In a sudden, unspoken understanding, the door closed, and the two of them rushed toward each other. They embraced tightly, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss as they clung to one another, shedding their fears and their clothes. The shattered cherry blossoms on the ground remained vibrant, a testament to the beauty that can arise from brokenness. End of this chapter. Chapter 1000, A Night of Growth. The rising sun cast a gentle glow on Penelope's profile, her fair skin radiating an enchanting allure. Atticus Blaine, who had been watching her all night, felt his heart stir once more. Despite the exhaustion from the previous night's impulsive escapade, he managed a sheepish smile. Resisting his urge, he leaned forward and placed a tender kiss on Penelope's cheek. Yet, even this slight gesture was enough to rouse her from slumber. Penelope's brow furrowed slightly as her long, dark lashes fluttered open. For a moment, she was disoriented by the face before her, but soon she regained her senses and let out a shy exclamation. She pulled the quilt over herself, curling up and turning away in mock annoyance. After a brief silence, Penelope, puzzled by the lack of comforting words, cautiously turned back. She was met with Atticus's goofy grin, and her heart swelled with love and happiness. Biting her rosy lips, she propped herself up and threw herself into Atticus's arms, their faces close, sharing a moment of intimacy. Holding her close, Atticus surveyed the small room, no larger than 30 or 40 square meters, which seemed to grow more charming as the morning light intensified. He suddenly understood how his parents had managed to find joy in such a cramped space as the burrow, surrounded by his many siblings. "Would you like something to eat, Atticus?" Penelope asked, noticing the change in his heartbeat. She sat up, her innocent expression meeting his gaze. As the blanket slipped from her shoulders, Atticus felt a wave of dizziness at the sight of her. "I just want to hold you a little longer," he replied, pulling her back into his embrace and covering her with the blanket. A profound sense of happiness filled Penelope's heart, and a smile spread across her lips. "But you have work at the Ministry of Magic, don't you? You need to eat to handle the workload," she reminded him. At the mention of the ministry, a flicker of bitterness crossed Atticus's eyes, but he remained silent, his voice calm and steady. "Oh, I'm not going." "What's going on, Atticus?" Penelope asked, startled. She pulled away, studying his face with surprise. They had been in love since their days at Hogwarts, and she knew this was unlike him. "Nothing, Penelope," Atticus replied, his youthful immaturity seemingly vanished overnight, replaced by a newfound calm and maturity. "Hey, Penelope." He glanced around the room. Though small, with no living room, just a bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a simple kitchen, it was tidy and filled with an atmosphere that captivated him. "Can I live with you, Penelope?" he asked, meeting her gaze. The cottage was a short-term rental, and if Penelope didn't secure the workshop job, she would have to return to her family's farm, as agreed. But in that moment, she forgot all about the agreement, her resolve firm. Penelope nodded slightly, offering Atticus a gentle smile, before resting her head on his shoulder again. "If you want, Atticus, that's fine, but you'll have to share the rent with me. I don't have that much money." They both chuckled, and Atticus hugged her tightly, taking a deep breath before exhaling with determination. "I've figured out some things, Penelope. I'm going to move out. You everything. I want you to be there with me." "Your presence gives me strength," Percy said, his voice filled with hope. Penelope gazed at him, her eyes softening with affection. "Of course, Percy. I'll be by your side," she replied, her voice steady and reassuring. Percy let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He had been carrying the burden of his struggles alone for so long, and now, with Penelope's support, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they sat together, the afternoon sun cast a warm glow over them, filtering through the leaves of the trees outside. The world seemed to pause for a moment, allowing them a brief respite from the chaos that had surrounded them. Atticus Blaine's influence had been profound, guiding Percy to confront his fears and uncertainties. The professor's wisdom had opened Percy's eyes to the complexities of the world and the importance of self-growth. Percy realized that stepping away from the ministry was not a failure, but a necessary step in his journey. "I'll learn everything I can at the Learning Machine Workshop," Percy said, determination lacing his words. "And when the time is right, I'll return to the ministry, ready to make a real difference." Penelope smiled, her heart swelling with pride for the man she loved. "I believe in you, Percy. You've already come so far." With renewed resolve, Percy and Penelope sat together, their hands intertwined, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they would navigate the uncertainties of the future, drawing strength from each other and the lessons they had learned along the way. "My mother is furious that I'm leaving the ministry, and she's about to tear me apart. Could you at least help me calm her down? My father is utterly useless when she's angry." End of this chapter.